Chapter 101, I Can't Kill You. International celebrity and author of several best-selling books, recipient of the Order of Merlin Third Class, honorary member of the Anti-Dark Arts League, and former professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Gilderoy Lockhart, was recently detained by the Ministry of Magic following an anonymous tip-off. At 3:15 p.m. today, the Wizengamot trial court concluded Lockhart's trial. He faces up to several years in prison for multiple offenses. The front page of the hastily updated Daily Prophet featured a photograph of Lockhart beneath a lengthy article. Unlike the polished images previously seen in public newspapers, this depiction of Lockhart was far from flattering. His hair was disheveled, he was shackled in magical chains, and he wore a prison uniform that hung loosely on his frame. His teeth were stained a dark yellow, and his face was shadowed by an unkempt beard. His blue eyes, once full of charm, now reflected confusion, as if he couldn't comprehend how he had ended up in such a predicament. Fate, indeed. This was likely the last time Gilderoy Lockhart would grace the headlines. Atticus Blaine's eyes twinkled with amusement as he tossed the newspaper aside. He turned his attention to Remus Lupin, who, once elegant, was now devouring a ferret sandwich with an almost ravenous hunger. The small coffee table between them was cluttered with empty plates. Noticing Atticus's gaze, Lupin struggled to swallow his mouthful and offered an apologetic smile. "I must look a mess right now," Lupin admitted sheepishly. Atticus smirked, his eyes lingering on the patches adorning Lupin's worn wizard robe. A mix of emotions stirred within him. "You're quite resourceful, Lupin. I don't understand why you're living like this." Lupin seemed poised to respond, but his attention shifted as Tom, the bar owner, approached with 2 glasses of sherry. Once Tom had respectfully placed the dark, sweet wine before them and retreated, Lupin rubbed his graying hair and spoke in a low, wry voice. "You know who I am, Mr. Blaine. Out there, no one is eager to hire a dangerous werewolf who can't work for a few days each month. In the underground market, some tasks aren't particularly complex. With your skills, they'd be easy to complete," Atticus suggested, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. Lupin's expression darkened visibly. He didn't immediately respond to Atticus' suggestion, instead staring at the half-eaten sandwich on his plate. The silence stretched on, testing Atticus's patience, until Lupin finally spoke, his voice tinged with bitterness. "True, but I dare not, Mr. Blaine. It's hard to explain this feeling to you. Perhaps it's best I keep my distance from anything illegal, unless I want to end up like Greyback." Sadness washed over Atticus as he listened to Lupin's explanation. Here was a werewolf who would rather endure poverty than risk harming others. Lupin was a kind and principled man, yet the magical world remained indifferent to the plight of werewolves. They refused to reconsider their prejudices, showing little sympathy for the injustices werewolves faced. Instead, they rejected all who were different. Though Atticus harbored no fondness for werewolves due to Greyback and his followers, he did not discriminate against them. However, he wasn't inclined to delve into the unfair oppression these unfortunate souls endured. In a world where people have turned their backs on the sky, Atticus Blaine suppressed a flicker of pity in his heart. Clearing his throat, he sneered, "So, Mr. Lupin, are you the cause of our troubles?" "Yes, Mr. Blaine," Lupin replied with a wry smile, nodding apologetically. "Albus wrote to me about how you might react when he suggested I see you again after you left Hogwarts." Atticus's eyes were as cold as his dismissive snort. He stared indifferently into Lupin's eyes. "I spared your life, Lupin," he said, his voice carrying a trace of menace that made Lupin uneasy. Lupin wanted to defend himself, but Atticus gave him no chance to speak. "And how did you repay my kindness?" Atticus continued. "By asking Dumbledore about my identity? You should know the consequences of such actions. If Dumbledore decides to eliminate me, I face 2 outcomes, a lifetime in Azkaban or exile from the European magical world, forced to wander aimlessly. Is this how werewolves express gratitude, so differently from normal wizards that I can't comprehend why you'd repay kindness with betrayal?" Lupin was speechless. After the fierce battle years ago, he was genuinely frightened by this young wizard who had vanished from the underground world. Subconsciously, He sought to uncover the true identity of the Golden Viper. He had written to Albus, disregarding the potential repercussions for Atticus. Justifications and apologies were futile before a wizard like the Golden Viper. To resolve this, he needed to offer something of value. "I have some information, Mr. Blaine, that might interest you," Lupin finally said after a long silence. Though in his early 30s, his precarious life and inner turmoil made him appear much older. Fenrir Greyback has resumed his activities. He's been discreetly inquiring about your real identity, possibly hoping to find your family. Additionally, he's reconnecting with some former allies. You know who I mean. I think he wants a decisive battle to settle old scores. "He's not dead yet?" Atticus remarked with a contemptuous snort, his tone tinged with surprise. "The resilience of werewolves is truly remarkable." "Unfortunately, Mr. Blaine, he is indeed alive," Lupin replied, taking a deep breath. "After your last encounter, half of his body was severely scorched. Normally, even a werewolf's vitality couldn't withstand such damage, but he was fortunate. As he lay dying, he recalled a powerful healing magic he received as a reward while serving the Dark Lord. It barely mended his broken body, and after some recovery, he regained his strength." "That's quite something," Atticus acknowledged indifferently. "But compared to the betrayal I've endured, Lupine, if Greyback causes trouble again, I'll ensure he's reduced to ashes. You don't expect this to appease my anger, do you?" Lupin's face was full of helplessness. He shook his robe, making the patches more conspicuous. "You understand my situation, Mr. Blaine. If you expect me to atone with galleons, I'm afraid I'll disappoint you." Atticus sipped his rum, contemplating the situation. Would killing Lupine ease his anger? Of course, it was impossible for him to. Atticus Blaine had always approached the idea of killing with the utmost caution. The conflict between him and Lupin had not escalated to the point where he felt compelled to draw his wand and end Lupin's life. Furthermore, Lupin had made it clear that he shared a unique relationship with Dumbledore, which added another layer of complexity to the situation. Atticus fell silent, and Lupin patiently awaited his decision. Neither spoke a word. During this tense pause, the bar owner, Tom, approached to inquire if they needed anything else. Lupin hesitated, but Atticus, with a generous wave of his hand, indicated that Tom should check the order himself. Lupin resumed eating, while Atticus, lost in thought, turned his attention away from Lockhart's face. He casually flipped through the pages of the Daily Prophet, and as he reached the 7th page, a job advertisement caught his eye. The message held his gaze, and a meaningful smile spread across his handsome face. End of this chapter. Chapter 102. A Proposal for Change. "What are you saying, Mr. Blaine?" Lupine's eyes widened in disbelief, his weathered and weary face a canvas of astonishment, shock, and confusion. He seemed to suspect that Atticus Blaine was playing a cruel joke, but the seriousness in Blaine's expression suggested otherwise. "You want me to apply for the Hogwarts Defense Against the Dark Arts professor position?" The suggestion seemed absurd to Lupin, a man seasoned by years of conflict. His eyebrows shot up, and his voice was hurried. "Mr. Blaine, surely you haven't forgotten who I am." The bar was bustling with patrons moving to and fro, prompting Lupin to lower his voice cautiously. "It's a commendable proposal, isn't it?" Atticus Blaine smiled warmly. "Being a professor is a respectable and meaningful occupation. It has nothing to do with evil, and it offers a good salary, which could lift you from your current hardships. You know, Dumbledore isn't one to be constrained by societal norms and rules. Lupin, your skills are impressive. I believe you can handle the job." As the crowd around them thinned, Lupin continued to grapple with the implications of Blaine's suggestion. "I attended that school, so I understand what being a professor entails, but that's not the issue, Mr. Blaine." The idea was undeniably appealing, yet Lupin's rational mind insisted it was impossible. "My identity as a werewolf isn't a secret to many. Do you think the Hogwarts Board of Trustees and the Ministry of Magic would allow Dumbledore to hire a werewolf to teach young wizards about defending against dark arts and dangers? It's ludicrous. I'm a dangerous magical creature myself." "If you can't see yourself clearly, Lupin, how can you expect others to view you rationally?" Atticus continued his persuasion. "Dumbledore will address all the concerns you have. Moreover, there's a potion master at the school who can brew wolfsbane potion, sparing you the agony of those few days each month. Wolfsbane Potion was a lifeline for wizards like Lupin, who were forced into lycanthropy. Unfortunately, its exorbitant cost was beyond the reach of most werewolves. Every night, Lupin wished for enough galleons to afford this precious potion. At the mention of it, Lupin hesitated, recalling the potion master's history with him, and could only shake his head with a rueful smile. "It's not that simple, Mr. Blaine," Lupin replied with a desolate smile. "If you had a child, would you be comfortable knowing their teacher was a werewolf who could lose control and attack at any moment?" Atticus was determined not to abandon this excellent idea of redemption. He patiently explained the benefits of being a respected professor. "Think about it, Remus," Atticus addressed Lupin with warmth. "If you excel in this role, it could lead to remarkable changes. People might begin to see werewolves in a new light, no longer viewing you with suspicion. Remus, you could be a beacon for others like you, forced to live in the shadows." Atticus's tone was fervent, and even he was impressed by his own persuasive abilities. "Could it be that I have the potential to become the next great leader?" he mused as he watched Remus Lupin, who was on the verge of agreeing. Lupin exhaled deeply. As a Gryffindor at heart, courage began to swell within him after Atticus's encouragement. "But there have been rumors about the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts," Lupin suddenly recalled, pointing to the newspaper spread out on the table, his brow furrowing. There had been some troubling rumors, and this year's Gilderoy Lockhart seemed to confirm them. "What nonsense!" Atticus Blaine exclaimed with righteous indignation. "They're just rumors. Look at me, Lupin. I left that position unscathed. I didn't suffer any harm. In fact, my luck has been quite good. Recently, I even received a small financial windfall." From every angle, Atticus's proposal seemed sound, yet it was precisely this that kept Lupin slightly wary. "Why, Mr. Blaine?" Lupin asked puzzled. "There's no doubt I've offended you. I wouldn't be surprised if you dealt with me as you did with my more ruthless colleagues before, but you didn't. Instead, you enthusiastically introduced me to work, trying to help me make ends meet. Isn't that strange?" "Because I recognize your ability and kindness, Remus," Atticus replied with a gentle smile, sensing he was close to achieving his goal. "The professor I worked with on this course spent several months closely with the young wizards at the school. They're a delightful group of children. They all deserve a proper and professional education, and they all should have a bright future. Gilderoy Lockhart's case clearly shows that even the great Dumbledore can sometimes make mistakes, and I can't bear the thought of those children wasting their most precious years. Remus, I believe you are capable of helping them." The brightest sunlight at noon dispelled the gloom in the bar and the fog in Lupin's heart. The doubts etched on his brow faded, and he smiled with relief. "I've got to go back and check on my herbs, Mr. Blaine," Lupin said, standing up and adjusting his worn robe. "I hope no one has fed my herbs to the centaurs. Thank you very much for your hospitality, Mr. Blaine. This meal will probably last me for several days." "About my proposal," Atticus began, watching Remus head towards Diagon Alley, his eyes narrowing as he stood. "I'm sorry, but I can't give you an answer right now. I still need some time to think it over carefully." As a wizard who had endured the harsh years of war and roamed the underground world for so long, Remus Lupin was more rational and cautious than Atticus had anticipated. "In addition," Lupin continued, standing in the golden light, his relaxed smile making him appear 20 years younger. He looked at the young wizard at the table with a knowing glint in his eyes. "I think I understand why Albus can still be so forgiving after knowing what you've done in recent years. You are indeed different from the person I once knew." "What do you mean?" Atticus's expression suddenly hardened. Lupin smiled, waved to him, and turned to walk into the light. After a moment, a gentle voice drifted back to Atticus from outside the door, leaving him in a long silence. "You have a tender heart, Atticus." End of this chapter. Chapter 103. After Lupin left, Atticus Blaine didn't immediately follow him out of the leaky cauldron. Exhausted from the multi-day mission, he decided to stay the night. He approached Tom, the bar owner, and requested a room, planning to return to the Muggle world the following day. The early July sunshine in London was bright, with a hint of laziness in the air. Atticus spent the entire afternoon in his room, only venturing out when the sun dipped below the horizon and the moon hung among the branches. He rubbed his sleepy eyes and slowly sat up from the bed. Once a person's mind relaxes, the body soon follows suit. Atticus, feeling the pangs of hunger, got up, dressed, and staggered out of the room. With Hogwarts on summer vacation, the bar was noticeably busier with wizards. However, most were merely passing through, bridging the gap between the wizarding and muggle worlds, rather than staying. Atticus spotted a few young wizards from the school, but his chosen seat behind a pillar kept him out of sight. The children, excited about the start of their summer vacation, didn't notice him, and Atticus was content to remain unnoticed, choosing not to greet them. He savored a piece of steak and sipped on a glass of rich red wine, quietly enjoying this rare moment of leisure. The bar buzzed with conversation, but the topic of the day was not the recent incident involving Rufus Scrimgeour and his Auror team, who had been sent to St. Mungo's by a dark wizard. Instead, the focus was on Gilderoy Lockhart, who had recently been disgraced and removed from his position as the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts. Lockhart, once a celebrated author in the European wizarding world, had become a pariah overnight after his past misdeeds were exposed. His former fans vanished, and those discussing him now claimed they had always seen through his facade, as if admitting otherwise would invite ridicule. 15 years in prison, Atticus murmured, shaking his head. The Wizengamot didn't go easy on him this time. He didn't recall what happened to Lockhart in the original story, but he doubted it could be worse than this. As he prayed for Lockhart's prison life, a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts, causing him to frown. Just sit there, Draco, and don't you notice your mother is carrying something? How did I teach you? The corner of Atticus's mouth twitched into an inexplicable smile. Draco Malfoy, who was notorious for his arrogance at school, was a different person at home. He never dared to defy his father's orders, and almost snatched the items from his mother's hands. After noticing what Narcissa was holding, Draco turned his back to Lucius, rolled his eyes, and muttered as he walked toward Atticus. Gryffindor lost to Hufflepuff, then Hufflepuff won, and Ravenclaw also lost to Hufflepuff. You beat Hufflepuff, then lost to Gryffindor in the final, but your total score was higher, so you won the championship? Atticus raised an eyebrow, looking at Draco, who was both excited and slightly reserved upon seeing him. He blinked and smiled. Wood didn't kill Potter? I suspect he wants to kill everyone on the Gryffindor team, Draco replied with a grin. His father's expulsion from the Hogwarts school board had upset him for a while, but the victory in the Quidditch match had restored his spirits. They had lost. Reflecting on the final score of the Gryffindor versus Slytherin match, which stood at 170 to 130, the moment Mrs. Hooch announced Slytherin's victory, the Gryffindor team seemed to freeze on their broomsticks as if petrified. Draco couldn't suppress the grin spreading across his face. As he eagerly recounted the details of the final match to Atticus Blaine, Lucius Malfoy maintained an eerie silence. He neither acknowledged his son nor glanced at Atticus, his light gray eyes fixed on the passers-by in the bar, exuding a chilling aura. Draco, Narcissa Malfoy, who had also been silent, suddenly interrupted her son's boasting. She cast a calm glance at her husband, stood up, and addressed Draco in a more solemn tone than usual. I just remembered that the dresses I ordered from the Tuofan clothing store are ready. I need you to accompany me. It's just a few clothes, Mom. There's no need to. How dare you disobey your mother's orders, Draco? Lucius snapped out of his wooden state, glaring at his son sternly. Reluctantly, Draco followed his mother out of the leaky cauldron. Atticus turned his attention away, flicked his wand, and murmured, Muffliato, before smiling at Lucius Malfoy. Your wife is very beautiful, Lucius, and quite intelligent, too. Lucius remained silent, his gaze fixed on the enigmatic young wizard before him. Unconsciously, his breathing grew slightly uneven. I hear you've been in some trouble since losing your position as a trustee at Hogwarts? Arthur Weasley, from the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office, has been visiting your manor frequently, seeking revenge for his youngest daughter. He seems to have discovered quite a few interesting gadgets. The mention of Arthur Weasley, a pure-blood wizard Lucius despised, nearly ignited a fire in his gray eyes. Atticus was right. The trouble Arthur had caused him had made him a laughingstock among pure-blood families. What troubled Lucius even more was Arthur's deep connections within the Ministry of Magic, despite his low rank. "This is thanks to your brother, isn't it?" Lucius took a deep breath, pushing thoughts of the self-indulgent fool who favored muggles out of his mind. He looked at Atticus, a cold smile playing on his lips, though his eyes remained devoid of warmth. "I've often wondered, Mr. Blaine, why the Daily Prophet never reported on your heroic actions in Slytherin's secret chamber. You subdued the beast and saved several students. Fudge even went through special procedures to award you a medal. Yet, the paper credits everything to Harry Potter and his reckless friends." "What do you think is the reason, Mr. Malfoy?" Atticus asked, sipping his red wine with a slight smile. End of this chapter. Chapter 104. As one of the 28 Holy Purebloods, a business magnate in the British magical world, and the true leader of the affluent and astute Malfoy family, Lucius Malfoy was a wizard who had seen much of the world. He had dealt with senior officials from the Ministry of Magic in Britain and various European countries, esteemed scholars, skilled potion masters, greedy and cunning goblins, and many other outstanding wizards who were leaders in their respective fields. Yet, the young wizard standing before him evoked a feeling that Lucius found difficult to articulate. It was somewhat akin to facing Dumbledore, and reminiscent of his own youth. "I think," Lucius mused, finding his own feelings absurd. He discreetly adjusted his breathing, easing the tension in his expression, and attempted to leverage his extensive negotiation experience to gain the upper hand in this exchange. "Could it be that Dumbledore is afraid you might outshine his favorite student, so he had a word with the minister? Your level of sobriety is disappointing, Mr. Malfoy." Atticus Blaine replied, his smile unwavering, though a hint of playfulness danced in his violet eyes. "If you're truly curious, Mr. Malfoy, I don't mind sharing. In fact, it was a request I made to Dumbledore. As for why?" Lucius held his breath instinctively, his gaze fixed on Atticus, hoping to exert some pressure on the young man. Yet his calculated indifference began to falter. "Of course, it's so that one day, when that dark wizard, whose name we dare not speak, re-emerges, he won't target me after learning what transpired at Hogwarts last year. Seriously, Mr. Malfoy, you don't believe that what you slipped into Ginny Weasley's school bag was just an ordinary diary, or that the Dark Lord crafted it out of boredom during Professor Binns' History of Magic class, do you?" "What do you mean?" Lucius's voice trembled, and beads of sweat formed on his forehead, betraying his shock. His face turned ashen, his lips cracked like parched earth, and the calmness in his eyes quickly gave way to turmoil and fear. "The Dark Lord is finished, isn't he? Harry Potter dismantled his magic. That's the truth everyone knows. If you're so keen on self-deception, please continue, Mr. Malfoy. It's not me who will suffer the consequences." Lucius's breath came in ragged gasps, his bloodshot gray eyes locked onto Atticus, who casually sipped his red wine. Fear made Lucius's legs tremble beneath the table. The prospect of the Dark Lord's return was a chilling thought. Among Voldemort's former followers, known as Death Eaters, many still longed for their old master. However, Lucius Malfoy was not among them. He vividly remembered the lengths he went to, and the promises he made to avoid sharing a cell with the Dementors in Azkaban after the Dark Lord's fall. If the Dark Lord were to return, the Malfoy family would certainly not be spared. Lucius understood the terror the Dark Lord inspired, and he couldn't deceive himself into believing he hadn't imagined the possibility of his return. Yet, as time passed, he considered it increasingly unlikely. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared to place the item the Dark Lord had entrusted to him in that little girl's school bag, merely to mock her father. Only that old fool Dumbledore believes he's coming back, trying to scare people so he can always be respected. Lucius Malfoy shouted, his voice hoarse and strained. He struggled to maintain his composure. "Perhaps," Atticus Blaine replied with a nonchalant shrug, "but I believe Dumbledore's concerns are justified, Mr. Malfoy. You clearly know more about the Dark Lord's powers than I do, don't you?" Atticus's words struck Lucius deeply. He clenched his teeth, his expression as if he had been struck by lightning. It took a long moment for his heart, numbed by fear, to start beating again. "Dumbledore told you. You know what that diary is, right? Tell me." I'm here today to prepare you, Mr. Malfoy, not to save your life, Atticus said, lowering his eyelids, his gaze intense. I don't care what happens to you, Malfoy, but if possible, I hope to save Draco's innocent soul. If the Dark Lord returns one day, I hope your preparations will ensure Draco and his mother survive. As for you, Lucius Malfoy, you may die. Lucius Malfoy was a shrewd businessman, having spent half his life pursuing family glory and wealth, but none of that mattered compared to the lives of Narcissa and Draco. Tell me, Blaine, what that thing is, if you truly care for Draco. Lucius's growl was muffled by Atticus's spell, yet his agitation drew the attention of many. Tom, the bar owner, recognized the famous Malfoy and hesitated before approaching. However, a glance from the young man opposite Mr. Malfoy stopped him in his tracks. I know whose door you entered at Hogwarts, Blaine. Lucius, in his desperation, failed to realize that his words might provoke Atticus Blaine. I know fudge, Blaine. He never imagined he'd award a precious Merlin second-class medal to a criminal from the underground world, right? I can uncover your identity, Blaine. You wouldn't want that, would you? Oh, that's amusing. Are you trying to threaten me? Atticus set down his wine glass, a cold smile on his lips. Malfoy, even though I never sought it out, your despicable deeds have reached my ears. I heard Arthur Weasley hid you in his house. You spent a fortune to escape after it was empty, and to fill your empty vault, you bought contraband from Cacus? Atticus stood slowly, towering over Lucius, his eyes as cold as the Black Lake. Who do you think I am, Malfoy? Dumbledore? Do you think those cold gold coins give you the courage to speak to me like this? End of this chapter. Chapter 105, Despair. Malfoy struggled to suppress the rising panic within him, attempting to muster a sneer to mock Atticus Blaine's disdain for wealth and power. However, he found himself unable to move, not even the corners of his mouth, nor any part of his body. At some point, the once noisy bar fell silent. The mingling aromas of various foods, the strong scent of alcohol, and the body odor of patrons moving about vanished entirely. It was as if an eraser had wiped away reality, leaving the bar, once vibrant in black and gray, to gradually lose its form, reducing the world from three-dimensional to two-dimensional. The remaining outlines quickly disappeared under the influence of mysterious forces. What unfolded before him defied Malfoy's understanding of magic. He stared, dumbfounded at the vanishing scene, his thoughts seemingly frozen. He found himself in a world of boundless pure white, devoid of any sense of direction, like a universe stripped of color. Lucius blinked, regaining his senses. Though he could control his body again, he remained immobile, bound by the cold chains of a stone chair that had inexplicably appeared beneath him, as if he were on trial. In the distance, or perhaps right before him, two purple suns emerged, and the outlines of figures began to materialize in the whiteness. Within seconds, Atticus Blaine appeared in this pure white realm, gazing down at the trembling Lucius Malfoy. His eyes, cold and indifferent, were like a dragon's, staring at a cowering goblin. Under this gaze of death, Lucius broke into a sweat, realizing he had made a grave mistake. Since the fall of the second Dark Lord Voldemort, the British wizarding world had enjoyed a long period of peace. Ordinary wizards no longer needed to brandish their wands in deadly combat. In such times, money and power held the greatest sway. Lucius, accustomed to mingling at elite gatherings and basking in the envy of lower-level wizards, felt a pang of regret. He recalled a truth he had learned during his years with the Dark Lord, but had since chosen to forget. Beneath the veneer of power lies violence, or rather, true power. The young man before him, who had effortlessly dealt with the Dark Lord's relics and the ancient basilisk in the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets, possessed a wealth and power far beyond his own. Forgive me. Malfoy, never one to stand firm, quickly reverted to the skills he had honed under the Dark Lord. He wept bitterly, daring only to look at Atticus's feet, mimicking Dobby's posture, and pleaded in a voice filled with humility, "Spare my life, Lord Mr. Blaine, for Draco's sake." The sound of footsteps grew clearer, causing Lucius to tremble even more. He longed to look up and gauge Atticus's expression to determine his fate, but fear held him back. He dreaded that Atticus might share the Dark Lord's aversion to being looked at directly. Voldemort, who refused to be named, never allowed his servants to meet his gaze, especially after undergoing a series of complex and dangerous experiments. Atticus Blaine's presence had become increasingly impersonal. Voldemort had sternly warned his Death Eaters multiple times not to breach this taboo. However, Lucius soon ceased to worry about his survival, as Atticus had already provided his answer through his actions. Clang! The sound of a spear piercing through flesh and embedding itself into the stone chair was unmistakably clear. Blood trickled from Lucius's abdomen, staining his wizard's robe like the vibrant yet ominous Manjusaka flower. The severe pain crashed over Lucius's consciousness like a relentless tide, causing his body to tremble uncontrollably, yet he dared not lift his gaze. "Spare Narcissa and Draco. Mr. Blaine. I'd give anything," Lucius pleaded, tears streaming down his face, making a desperate and humble request at the end of his life. The only response he received was a cold, disdainful snort. "Let this be a lesson, Malfoy. Do not set an example," Atticus's icy voice echoed in Lucius's ears. As his consciousness began to fade, endless questions swirled in his mind, the flame of his life flickering like a candle in the wind. From the tone of Atticus's words, it seemed he intended to spare Draco, but hadn't he already acted? The pain from the bronze spear was all too real, and the sensation of life slipping away was undeniable. Perhaps Atticus meant he wouldn't harm Narcissa and Draco further? Lucius clung to this thought as darkness slowly consumed his awareness. "Honey, honey, are you all right?" A sudden dim yellow light pierced the darkness, jolting Lucius as if awakening from a deep dream. He found himself standing behind a pillar, bewildered, with his wife and son looking at him with concern. Gradually, color returned to his pale face. Lucius turned his head stiffly and saw not only Narcissa and Draco, but also a crowd of onlookers. "Mr. Malfoy, are you okay?" Tom, the bar owner, pushed through the crowd. He looked at Lucius's face, which bore the pallor of someone recovering from a grave illness, and spoke with a tremor in his voice. As the head of the renowned Malfoy family, if anything had happened to Lucius in his bar, Tom knew the consequences would be dire. "Where is that man?" Lucius asked, surprised by the hoarseness and dryness of his voice, as if he hadn't had water in days. "If you mean the young guest who was with you," Tom replied respectfully, "he left some time ago, Mr. Malfoy. After he departed, you stood here, in a daze. I thought you were contemplating something important, so I didn't dare disturb you." "What's wrong, dear?" Narcissa asked, frowning at her husband in confusion. Draco's expression shifted subtly. He knew his father well and understood that Lucius could be habitually condescending when speaking to those of lesser renown. If his father had used that tone with Professor Blaine— "Professor Blaine is a very powerful wizard, father," Draco said, his voice tinged with panic. "And he can be quite stern, especially when offended." "Offended?" Narcissa glared at Draco, displeased. "What do you mean by that, Draco?" "Draco." Lucius, who had been silent, suddenly interrupted, fixing his gaze on Draco's confused eyes. "If you encounter Professor Blaine again, show him more respect." "Professor Blaine has left Hogwarts, father. He's very mysterious, and I doubt I'll have many opportunities to meet him again," Draco replied, still puzzled by his father's insistence. After a moment of hesitation, he spoke with regret. "No, he's definitely going back to Hogwarts." Lucius gazed beyond the shifting crowd, pointing directly into the dark night outside the door. Following a brief silence, he exhaled deeply and declared with unwavering certainty, "He'll definitely be back there." End of this chapter. Chapter 106, The Return. The last time Atticus Blaine returned, the world was cloaked in a harsh winter, with snow piling up against closed doors. Now the maple leaves lining the road have shed their deep crimson hues, bursting with renewed vitality. Situated on the city's outskirts, the ground is interwoven with abandoned railway tracks, and the narrow streets remain unchanged since his last visit. Unlike the ever-evolving Muggle city, this place feels more like a haven for the wizarding world, where time has etched its indelible marks. Even in an era where change happens in the blink of an eye, the remnants of the past cling stubbornly, unyielding, and steadfast. The only anomaly is a 6-story building with a sky-blue facade, standing out amidst rows of gray, century-old structures. Beyond the new iron gate lies a courtyard, its atmosphere contrasting sharply with the weathered surroundings. The once earth-covered yard is now paved with smooth stone slabs. In the corner flower bed, vibrant Tudor roses and alfalfa bask in the morning light. The golden pink sun dances in the breeze, casting a gentle glow on the dew-kissed petals. This serene beauty brings a genuine smile to Atticus's face. Dressed in a black short-sleeved t-shirt, blue jeans, and sneakers, Atticus, disguised as a muggle, stands quietly in the yard. Behind him is an oversized suitcase, filled with gifts he promised Mrs. Reagan for the children. Admittedly, lugging such a large box is cumbersome, but he has no choice. He can't exactly pull a folding bicycle from a handbag. The clatter of breakfast in the dormitory gradually fades, and Atticus knows that soon a throng of children in ill-fitting worn uniforms will rush out to begin their day. Delivering milk, newspapers, and washing dishes at the breakfast shop, such was the childhood of orphans here, and Atticus once did the same. However, he quickly tired of these monotonous, low-paying jobs and turned to more technical pursuits. He would do homework for grammar school kids miles away, use his superpowers to escort bullied children, or trade in trinkets that piqued the interest of his peers. The latter was the most lucrative, but Atticus soon abandoned it, as Muggle police and government inspectors, though not urban management, still maintained order. Time is a magical vessel, transforming past hardships into rich, sweet memories. Experience is more important, Cage. Even with more residents on East Street, I bet I can finish the task faster than you. A lively, confident voice echoed from the hall, pulling Atticus from his reverie. He raised an eyebrow, a smile brighter than the golden sun spreading across his face. As the children filed through the hall, they froze at the sight of the tall, handsome young man standing in the courtyard. Despite the loud urgings from their peers, they remained speechless. "Brother Atticus?" murmured the little brown-haired boy at the front, rubbing his eyes in disbelief. "Good morning, little ones." Atticus grinned, opening his arms wide. The summer weather, much like the temperament of an adolescent girl, was unpredictable and full of surprises. The morning sky was clear, but soon after, a sudden downpour began. The decades-old sewers, long overdue for renovation, struggled to handle the deluge. In no time, rainwater pooled ankle-deep on the stone-paved streets. Despite the inclement weather, the children from the orphanage remained in high spirits. With their satchels held over their heads, they splashed through puddles, grinning as they hurried towards the 6-story building from all directions. In the modest foyer, Atticus Blaine was surrounded by dozens of children. The youngest were only 4 or 5 years old, while the older ones were about the same age as Harry and his friends. Atticus regaled them with tales of the wonders beyond their small world. "It's not just Europe, Dean," he began. "The reason I haven't been back for so long is that I traveled to another continent, Egypt. I'm sure you've heard of it. There are pyramids and endless deserts," a little boy with flushed cheeks exclaimed, raising his hand excitedly. "When I delivered milk to Mrs. Carrion, I saw pictures on her TV. It's beautiful there." "Can we have a TV too, Brother Atticus?" asked a little girl nestled in his arms, her voice still sweet and childlike. "That's not a problem, Lena," Atticus replied, kissing her forehead with a smile. "I'll discuss it with Mrs. Reagan. Soon, every dormitory in this building will have a color TV. We might even set up a room with several computers so you can take turns playing games when you're free." The children's cheers drowned out the sound of the rain, nearly shaking the glass in the hall's doors and windows. Amidst the laughter, a curious child asked, "Brother Atticus, aren't you with a drilling rig company? Why would you need drilling rigs in a desert like Egypt?" "Ahem, there are cities there too, Elisa," Atticus replied, improvising as he touched his nose sheepishly. "Wherever there's land, there's always a need for drilling rigs." "Brother Atticus," Little Hammer, who had been waiting patiently for a chance to speak, waved his hands eagerly. "Can you stay home a bit longer this time?" "Of course, Little Hammer," Atticus said, ruffling the boy's hair with a warm smile. "I'll stay longer. In fact, I'm back not just to see you all, but also to help with your schooling issues. The folks in charge of the public schools can't keep blaming the lack of classrooms and teachers for such a small problem." The children exchanged puzzled glances before bursting into laughter. "That problem's already solved, Brother Atticus," Little Hammer announced proudly. "Sister Vitia has already negotiated with the school. By September, many of us will be able to attend public schools." "Sister Vitia?" Atticus asked, surprised. "Who is she? A new staff member?" End of this chapter. Chapter 107. Your Name. As night descended, the starlight, purified by the rain, re-emerged with an unparalleled purity and brilliance. These celestial lights reflected in the small puddles scattered across the ancient streets and courtyards, transforming the wet ground into a mysterious, starry expanse. In the 6-story orphanage, the restaurant on the second floor had been transformed into a banquet hall. A dinner party was underway, and while it couldn't rival the grandeur of a Hogwarts opening feast or a Halloween celebration, its excitement was undeniable. As the banquet progressed, Atticus Blaine, who had initially been the center of attention, found himself gradually sidelined. The children, who rarely enjoyed such a feast even on Christmas, moved briskly among tables laden with fried steaks, grilled sausages, potato pies, panna cotta, and an array of fruit juices. Their smiles, more radiant than blooming tulips, lit up their youthful faces. Atticus leaned against the wooden railing of the stairs, observing the scene with a gentle expression. His gaze shifted, and when it settled on a smiling figure dining with the children, his eyelids fluttered slightly, and a peculiar glint appeared in his eyes. She was a gentle and comforting presence. Clad in a simple off-white dress that just reached her knees, her long emerald green hair, matching her eyes, cascaded smoothly over her shoulders. Her fair skin glowed subtly under the dim light. Even from a distance, Atticus could faintly detect the fresh scent of the river lingering around her. Misty and ethereal, graceful and elegant, this was Atticus's impression of her. Despite his extensive travels between worlds, he had never encountered such a graceful lady. Ms. Vitia Hill, a volunteer at the orphanage, seemed to sense Atticus's gaze. She turned her head, met his eyes, and nodded with a smile. Atticus returned the gesture, and when no one was watching, he quietly ascended the stairs. Upstairs, the lively noise from the second floor was still audible. Atticus walked through the dim corridor, his expression blank, occasionally tapping the walls to assess the dormitory's condition. Before he realized it, he had reached the top floor. Using a steel ladder next to a laundry room, Atticus climbed to the roof and approached the guardrail. The view from the rooftop wasn't expansive, as rows of low buildings on either side obscured much of the surrounding scenery. However, the distance from the hustle and the dim lights allowed the starry sky to shine brightly. Atticus rested his arms on the railing, gazing quietly at the night sky. After an indeterminate amount of time, a cool night breeze brushed against his face. He narrowed his eyes and took out a cigarette. Smoking had been a habit from his past life, one he was addicted to back then. But since arriving in this world and reliving infancy, childhood, and adolescence, he had successfully quit and had no intention of resuming. Yet in moments of melancholy, he would still take out a cigarette to savor the scent of tobacco. Suddenly, he heard crisp footsteps on the steel ladder behind him. Atticus crushed the cigarette in his hand and let the wind carry it away before turning to look. He was momentarily taken aback. "Mrs. Reagan told me that every time you come back here, you seem to enjoy spending long periods alone on the rooftop," Vitia observed as she approached Atticus Blaine with graceful steps, offering him a coat. "It seems you are a quiet person, Mr. Blaine." "Thank you," Atticus replied, accepting the coat but not putting it on. He glanced at Vitia, who, despite wearing low-heeled sandals, appeared tall. With a casual smile, he added, "Please, call me Atticus." Though Vitia tried to mask her emotions, a hint of curiosity lingered in her pure eyes. Working at the orphanage, she often heard the children speak longingly of Atticus, hoping for his return. Over time, it was only natural for her to become curious. "I heard from Mrs. Reagan and the children that you managed to solve the issue of the little ones about attending school. That's quite impressive, Miss Hill. Dealing with those bureaucratic officials and the greedy school staff isn't easy. How did you manage it?" Atticus asked, his gaze briefly resting on Vitia's eyes and hair, a smile playing on his lips. "Actually, I'm not as capable as you might think, Mr. Blaine. I simply asked my father for some assistance. He's a professor at the University of London and has connections with a few government officials. Although it was a minor issue, fortunately, it wasn't too complicated," Vitia explained modestly. Atticus nodded, acknowledging her efforts. He shifted his gaze to the street below, where few people were visible. Though he expressed gratitude, his tone remained calm. Regardless, Miss Hill, I must thank you on behalf of the children." The two stood leaning against the railing, the night deepening around them. Though they were meeting for the first time, their conversation flowed as if they were old friends. "When I was here, the conditions were much worse than they are now," Atticus began, his voice carrying a hint of nostalgia. "In summer, the rooms were stifling, and we had to sleep on mats in the courtyard, enduring the mosquitoes bred by the poor drainage system. In winter, with no funds to repair doors, windows, or cracked walls, the rooms leaked everywhere. The biting cold winds were unbearable with just a thin blanket. To avoid freezing, several of us would huddle together on one bed, trembling and waiting for dawn. Many kids my age severed ties with the orphanage after leaving, and I understand why. It held too many unpleasant memories." Though his recollection was abrupt, Vitia showed no surprise. She pursed her lips and asked, "Mrs. Reagan mentioned you went to a boarding school. I heard your parents registered you before you were even born." Atticus rubbed his fingers, smiling casually. "I spent my entire teenage years there. It was a good school, the food was delicious, and we could sleep well. You, Miss Hill, must have grown up in a better environment than the one below. How fortunate are these children?" Vitia brushed the stray hair from her eyes, her voice ethereal as she replied, "Actually, it's not as good as you might imagine." Atticus nodded slightly, choosing not to press further. They stood side by side, gazing into the deepening night, a silence settling between them, tinged with an unspoken melancholy. No child came up to seek Atticus or Vitia. The clever little ones, along with the staff, quietly tidied the messy dining area and returned to their rooms, whispering and giggling under the covers about Brother Atticus and Miss Vitia on the rooftop. As the lights in the houses on both sides of the street extinguished one by one, leaving only the dim glow of the street lamps, a profound quiet enveloped everything. "Then, Miss Vitia," Atticus began, breaking the silence. As the moon hung low in the western sky, Atticus Blaine turned his head with an expressionless demeanor and asked, "May I know your real name?" "Vitia," came the response, accompanied by an unsurprising smile on the face of the elegant lady beside him. Her features were bright and refined, exuding an air of grace. She lowered her eyes slightly and whispered an apology. "Vitia Creona, that is my true name, Mr. Golden Viper. Note, apologies for the delay in the next installment. I'm currently at work." End of this chapter. Chapter 108. Your Purpose. Despite my caution, it seems everyone knows who the Golden Viper is, Atticus Blaine remarked with a self-deprecating smile. "We paid a terrible price to find you," Vitia said, her tone laden with apology. She seemed eager to express regret for approaching Atticus in this manner, but he didn't give her the chance. He turned and walked away, his steps steady. As he reached the stairs and his figure began to fade into the shadows, his voice echoed back, indifferent yet firm. "Let's change locations, Miss Corona. I have no desire to engage in a confrontation here, especially not with a powerful wizard like you." The two left the city lights behind, heading eastward into the suburban wilderness. Vitia followed Atticus closely. As they crossed an arch bridge over a small river, she noticed Atticus stumble slightly, his gaze momentarily drawn to the slow-moving water. He quickly regained his composure and continued forward with steady steps. They walked in silence for a long time until the city road transformed into a winding, wild path. Atticus stopped abruptly. From seemingly nowhere, he produced a wand and swung it with force, sending the animals lurking in the shadows scurrying away in panic from the impending danger. "Tell me, Miss Corona," Atticus began, as a brilliant fire enveloped him. His casual attire vanished, replaced by a slightly worn dark green wizard's robe. Despite the tension, a lazy smile played on his lips. "How did you discover that the Golden Viper is Atticus Blaine? I doubt the terrible price you mentioned was merely a lot of galleons." "Birdography, Mr. Blaine," Vitia replied. "In the wilderness, the night sky, adorned with countless stars and a bright moon, provided the only illumination." Vitia, exuding a natural aura, seemed to blend seamlessly with the environment. "Divination?" Atticus asked incredulously. "I recall casting protective spells on myself to prevent being tracked or cursed. Miss Corona, you're lying." "Divination and sacrifice," Vitia admitted, her previously calm demeanor now tinged with sadness and pain. Her eyes lowered, she continued. "You are a powerful wizard, Mr. Blaine, To uncover the true identity of the Golden Viper, a venerable elder sacrificed his life. How touching, Atticus sneered, his eyes cold and calculating. What is your purpose, Miss Corona? If my memory serves me right, I've never had any quarrel with the Druids. Why would you, inheritor of the name Creona and esteemed master sacrifice, approach me in such a manner? We need your help, Mr. Blaine, Vitia said, raising her head. Her eyes, as pure as emerald starlight, met his with sincerity, seemingly oblivious to the chill surrounding him. Since you've heard of us, you must know of our conflict with the Holy See. For centuries, we've wandered across Europe and America, seeking a sanctuary. Yet those priests, committing atrocities in the name of faith, have relentlessly pursued us. And what does this have to do with me? Atticus continued to sneer. Do you expect me to storm the Vatican and assassinate the Pope? If so, I have a recommendation. Albus Dumbledore, the headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, is more powerful than I am, with a high status and a kind heart. Surely he would pity your plight and perhaps be willing to assist you. Vitia, unfazed by Atticus's sarcasm, continued her plea. With a heavy sense of historical responsibility and a calm heart, she remained unshaken. We don't want any innocent people caught in our fierce ideological conflict with the Holy See, Mr. Blaine. For centuries, we've relied on our own strength to protect our beliefs. Even in our darkest moments, we've never considered turning to the power of wizards. But Atticus Blaine, uninterested in a lengthy history lesson, interrupted Vitia. Your purpose, and the reason you've come to me, Lord Sacrifice, is what I want to hear. We wish to open Merlin's ruins, Mr. Blaine. There is a legendary item there that originally belonged to the Druids. With its power, perhaps we can find a peaceful place to hide. Merlin's remains? Atticus narrowed his eyes, his tone uncertain. Are you referring to the black stone tower Merlin built in the underground world of Nocturne Alley? Before Vitia could respond, Atticus recalled something and frowned. I've received some warnings. Earlier this year, a previously unknown group appeared in the underground world. They commissioned an exploration of magical relics, but it ended inconclusively. Afterward, they began inquiring about my identity. It must have been Mr. Cacus Foley who informed you, Vitia replied with a slight smile. We only posted commissions with him, and we noticed he seemed quite interested in our origins. Atticus thought to himself that Vitia was a formidable woman, both in strength and wisdom. As their conversation continued, his initial anger subsided, though he still disliked the priestess's unscrupulous approach. He felt troubled by her persistent entanglement. We don't know exactly what lies within that mysterious black tower in the underground world, but Merlin's final resting place is not there, Mr. Blaine, Vitia explained. She raised her right hand, and the light blue bracelet on her slender wrist emitted a dazzling brilliance, transforming into a staff formed by intertwining thick vines. Atticus could feel the powerful mana and vitality emanating from this uniquely shaped staff. Vitia lifted the staff and, using the void as a canvas, began to draw. Soon, a white scroll unfurled in the air. The image resembled a television screen, depicting an ancient priestess with eyes and hair the same color as Vitia's. She stood in a primeval forest unfamiliar to Atticus. The old priestess, on a gray and white altar, held the staff high. As ancient and mysterious chants echoed through the jungle, the dark emerald branches and leaves of the ancient trees around the altar glowed with green fluorescence. Black mist rose from the ground, and the faint light and mist seemed to converge before the old priestess, forming a blurred light and shadow. The outline of the light and shadow gradually became clear, revealing a strange golden snake in the untouched virgin forest. The old priestess's face turned pale, and she spat blood from her mouth. Upon seeing the strange snake, Atticus was stunned, finally understanding how he had become a target. Note, this book will not delve into the Holy See, and it may seem a bit disjointed for those familiar with HP colleagues. End of this chapter. Chapter 109, Decision. We have received enlightenment from the earth and the gods we believe in. The wizard marked by this snake will aid us in retrieving the sacred objects belonging to the Druids from the place where Merlin rests eternally. Initially, we misunderstood, and it took several months of fruitless searching. After numerous twists and turns, through ordinary divination and investigation, We deduced that it seemed to be in the underground world of London's Turning Lane, a wizard's identity marker, Vitia explained eloquently. Atticus Blaine listened intently, frowning as he pondered why the druid priests and their divinations would lead to such a conclusion. He had never had any dealings with these people. Wizards by nature are a conservative and exclusive group. Even those with impure blood are often rejected in the European magical world, let alone the druid sect, which had parted ways with the secret witch school many years ago. We dared not search for you in the underground world openly, fearing it might cause you trouble. When we finally identified the owner of this snake symbol, you suddenly vanished from the underground world, Vitia continued. Atticus remained silent. If not for Dumbledore's cunning in bringing him back to Hogwarts, he might have encountered these people months earlier. In desperation, my teacher, the ancestral priestess of our church, sought divine guidance once more. This time, after sacrificing her life, she received clear instructions. Atticus Blaine. We learned your name, but at that time, you were teaching at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, under the watchful eye of Albus Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard of our time. We wished to avoid any confrontation with him, as any leaked information could lead to misunderstandings with our enemies. We observed you from the shadows, and when you left Hogwarts, we debated how to approach you. Some of us believed we should directly explain our reasons and seek your help. Others thought that by concealing the truth and continuing to issue commissions in the underground world with enticing rewards, you would eventually be drawn to us. Under the bright moonlight and the gentle whisper of the breeze, Atticus gradually calmed his aura of tension. He scrutinized the priestess, whose origins and true intentions were as enigmatic as a shrouded mist, weighing his options carefully. But before formally negotiating with you, I hope to show some goodwill by having my partners leave the UK for other countries. Based on previous investigations, I found this orphanage and became a volunteer there, Vitia added. Atticus snorted coldly, his tone indifferent. On the contrary, I think the method proposed by your companions is more sensible. The cause and effect were clear, yet there were still aspects Atticus hadn't fully grasped. For over 1,000 years, countless wizards and even muggles have searched for Merlin's resting place, but no one has found valuable clues, except for the Blackstone Tower in the underground world that remains sealed. Are you telling me it's divination again? Vitia remained silent, and Atticus realized her question likely touched on the core secrets of the druid sect. What is in Merlin's ruins, or what do you hope to obtain from it? With an ethereal demeanor, Vitia apologized. I'm sorry, Mr. Blaine, I can't answer your question at this time. However, you will eventually know if you accept the commission to enter the ruins. Atticus twitched slightly, contemplating the weight of her words. Vitia pressed her lips together in disbelief. Though she was reluctant to speak, at least she chose not to deceive. You should be grateful you didn't engage in too many unnecessary activities during your time at the orphanage, Miss Corona, Atticus Blaine remarked lightly. Otherwise, the druid might have had to make another change in the priestess. What do you mean? What can you offer me, Miss Corona? I don't know the nature of your relationship with Merlin concerning the ruins you mentioned, or the dangers that lie within. However, I do know that the value of this task is exceedingly high, perhaps even beyond measure. So, Miss Corona, what can you offer in return? When Atticus returned to the orphanage alone, the moon had already risen to the other side of the house. The cold air carried a faint floral fragrance as he stood quietly in the courtyard for a moment. Once he felt calm, he gently opened the door and entered the hall. Did you kiss? A strange voice called out from the darkened corridor as he passed the 3rd floor. Go to bed, little hammer, and mind your own business, Atticus retorted without breaking stride. He made his way to a room specially prepared for him on the 6th floor. After a quick wash in the dark, he sighed with relief and lay down on the soft mattress. Though his body relaxed, his thoughts churned like waves in a storm. That night, he had deepened his understanding of the magical world's mysteries. The druids, who seemed to appear out of nowhere, had used divination techniques that Atticus had previously dismissed. They had uncovered the origins of his identity, and although Vitia claimed they paid a steep price, Atticus considered it insignificant. The most pressing issue was the divination result shared by the druid with the previous generation's priestess. This mysterious and ancient sect had been passed down through the ages, and their conflict with the Orthodox Holy See was even mentioned in Muggle storybooks. Atticus believed that if they truly desired the legendary magical artifacts, they would have conducted such divinations regularly over the centuries, yet they remained hidden. Considering the huge price Vitia mentioned, Atticus suspected that each generation of druid priests might perform these divinations in their final days. But why was he involved? In the quiet darkness, Atticus furrowed his brow. The first time he heard of the druid sect and the ancient surname Creona was on the Hogwarts Express many years ago. After purchasing snacks from the witch selling peanuts, melon seeds, and mineral water, he later encountered the name in the 4th grade. Professor Binns had briefly mentioned the conflicts among wizards, muggles, and the Holy See during the Middle Ages. Out of curiosity, Atticus had researched some popular science materials in the library for an after-school thesis. He never imagined that years later he would be entangled with a Creona. Reflecting on his 20 years of life, Atticus was certain he had never been involved with them. Yet he sensed a deeper secret behind the divination, one he had yet to uncover. He could tell that Vitia Creona had been mostly truthful, but there were still aspects worth pondering. The notion of a legendary item capable of helping them resist the Holy See's influence, which was both mysterious and extraordinarily influential in the Muggle world, seemed somewhat absurd to Atticus. End of this chapter. Chapter 110, Stonehenge. Hello, sir, madam. Tickets are £34 per person, totaling £68 for two. For an additional £7, we can offer you a commemorative picture book and a tour map, the young woman at the ticket booth said with a polite smile. Her round face suggested she might be a student working part-time. Atticus Blaine and Vitia stood before her, the sunlight from the west casting a warm glow on Atticus's face. He glanced at Vitia, who showed no intention of paying. With a slight curl of his lips, he reached into his pocket, pulled out some coins and a note, and handed them over. It had been 2 weeks since Atticus returned to the orphanage, the longest he had stayed since graduating. He was there not only to fulfill a promise to Little Hammer, but also to contemplate whether he should accept the druid priestess's request. After much deliberation, Atticus agreed. It wasn't the promise of generous rewards from Vitia that swayed him. The druids, having been hunted by the Holy See for centuries, were not wealthy. Instead, 2 reasons compelled him. First, the allure of Merlin's ruins was irresistible to any wizard or muggle. Even Dumbledore might have been tempted to explore the place of Merlin's eternal rest, though Atticus still didn't fully understand what it entailed. Second, he was intrigued by the divination of the last druid priests before their demise. Despite his dealings with religious forces like the Holy See and the Druids, he couldn't fathom why an orthodox wizard like himself would be involved. Deep down, Atticus suspected it might relate to his identity as a time traveler. It was summer vacation, and Stonehenge Park on the Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, a renowned Muggle tourist destination, was bustling with visitors. Atticus, lost in thought, suddenly felt a coolness in his arms. He snapped back to reality to find Vitia pressed against him by the crowd. The tightness in his chest and the stiffness in his back made him take a deep breath, inhaling a fresh scent that quickened his heartbeat and momentarily clouded his mind. "Sorry, Mr. Blaine." Vitia's cold voice cut through the commotion like a splash of cold water, dispelling the strange feelings that had arisen in Atticus's heart. He hooked his fingers into the pocket of his jeans, blocking the conversation from others. "Is this the Merlin ruins you mentioned?" Atticus asked with a smile, exhaling heavily. "Did Merlin turn himself into a stone before he died? No wonder no one has found his resting place for over 1,000 years." Following the crowd, they stood outside a circle of iron railings painted white. Nearby, a Muggle tour guide was explaining the origins of Stonehenge to a group of middle school students. Salisbury Stone Ring, Ring Stone, Sun Temple, Prehistoric Stone Table, Stonehenge has had many names throughout history. Scientists generally believe it was constructed around 2000 BC, though they still debate how it was built, the guide explained. The ancient ancestors, who lived during the Stone and Bronze Ages, managed to construct such a magnificent stone circle despite having extremely limited technological capabilities. "Sir, what was the purpose of building it?" a Muggle middle school student asked, raising his right hand earnestly. This gesture made Atticus Blaine smile, as it reminded him of Hermione Granger, who was always eager to answer questions in his defense against the dark arts class. He wondered how the young witch would react upon seeing Gilderoy Lockhart's report. "Good question," Atticus replied, raising his voice to be heard over the surrounding noise. "It is believed that the ancient ancestors built Stonehenge for astronomical observations. The main axis of Stonehenge, the ancient road leading to the stone pillars, aligns with the rising sun on the morning of the summer solstice. Additionally, a line connecting two stones points toward the sunset of the winter solstice. Therefore, it is speculated that ancient humans constructed it to observe astronomical phenomena, making it one of the earliest prototypes of an observatory. The ancient druids' purpose in building it was not only for star divination but also to harness magical power from beyond this world," Vitia interjected. "Drain magical power from beyond the world?" Atticus frowned, intrigued by Vitia's statement. In the magical community, there was a consensus about Stonehenge's builders and its purpose, but Vitia's words piqued his curiosity. Wearing a white floral dress and a straw hat, Vitia fell silent, her gaze fixed on the doorway formed by several boulders. An air of quiet resistance surrounded her. Atticus studied her thoughtfully and then asked, "Although I'm not sure how this Stonehenge relates to the ruins you mentioned, you've been inside many times, haven't you?" "You are very perceptive, Mr. Blaine," Vitia replied. Her striking appearance drew attention from many tourists around them, but Atticus, walking beside her, felt no envy. Instead, he was intrigued, as he had finally encountered a wizard whose occlumency skills rivaled his own, apart from Snape and Dumbledore. The two of them didn't converse much afterward, choosing instead to follow the group of Muggle tourists exploring the magnificent Stonehenge. Atticus attempted to observe Stonehenge from a different perspective, sensing that the magical energy in the void was distorted in this space. Typically, such a phenomenon indicated a high concentration of magical power nodes, yet, to Atticus, the stones appeared to be nothing more than ordinary large rocks. As the moon rose over the southeastern horizon, Atticus and Vitia dined at a nearby Muggle restaurant. They then set up a tent on the lawn, both skilled in this task. Without using magic, they easily erected a dome tent. "How long do we need to wait?" Atticus asked, breaking a long silence as he gazed at the undulating green waves of the plain. He had a foreboding sense that something ominous would occur during their exploration. However, Vitia, the druid priestess, seemed reluctant to discuss the ruins. Whenever Atticus broached the subject, she would fall silent. In the flickering light of the tent, curious eyes from various directions watched Vitia, who stood beside Atticus. Her appearance, reminiscent of an Oriental woman, drew the attention of many Muggle men nearby. Gradually, the atmosphere grew tense. Atticus Blaine found himself captivated by her elegant demeanor. Amidst a gathering of Muggles enjoying a communal meal, two young men rose from their seats. Judging by their path, it appeared they were making their way toward Vitia. However, before they could get too close, they were deterred by the warning in Atticus's watchful eyes. With a knowing smile, they turned away. "Let's wait until the Muggles have settled down, Mr. Blaine," one of them suggested. "We'll make our move later." End of this chapter. Chapter 111, The Mirror of Erised. In the latter half of the night, the bright moonlight bathed the plains, casting its glow like a powerful searchlight. Every blade of grass swayed, its silhouette clearly defined in the luminescence. Within the camp, most of the Muggles had succumbed to a deep slumber. Yet, in front of a few tents, some remained awake, drunkenly gathered around the fire. In the scenic park, several night patrol staff were curled up in the sentry box, sleeping soundly. To prevent any disturbances, Atticus Blaine had cautiously cast a stun spell on each of them, ensuring they wouldn't be awakened by any sudden need to relieve themselves, thus avoiding any mishaps. As night enveloped the land, the ordinary rocks within the railing began to reveal their secrets. A thin mist, seemingly from nowhere, surrounded them, and Stonehenge exuded an aura of mystery. Muggles had noticed this anomaly, but despite numerous experiments and research, their scientists failed to provide a reasonable explanation. Ultimately, they attributed the phenomenon to an abnormal geomagnetic field. This Stonehenge is incomplete, and the missing stone pillars are the key to unlocking the ruins. "We found one pillar, but we still can't complete it," Vitia remarked to Atticus with a hint of regret. She was no longer dressed as a Muggle. Instead, she wore a slightly beige sackcloth wizard robe, holding a grapevine cane. Her green hair floated softly behind her, perfectly embodying Atticus's image of the mysterious priest profession. Atticus pressed his palm against the pillar of the door, feeling the unnatural warmth emanating from it. After a moment, he didn't inquire about how to open the door. Instead, he turned to Vitia, who seemed perpetually calm, and asked casually, "How many times have you failed?" "I've been in 3 times, Vitia replied lightly. "My teacher has entered 5 times. The space beyond the door suppresses ordinary people. Of course, it won't pose much trouble for a powerful wizard like you." Atticus understood that the ordinary people Vitia referred to were not Muggles. He wasn't overly concerned, having already prepared himself mentally. "Due to its incompleteness, when we enter the door, we appear at random locations. The ancestors of the Druids left a mark at the center of the ruins. I can reach it directly using the mark, but Mr. Blaine, you may need to rely on your own strength to reach the center of the island." Atticus, noting the mention of island, nodded in agreement. Although this journey was to help Vitia retrieve the sacred object that originally belonged to the Druids, the resting place of Merlin, understanding why the Druids' ancestral prophecy involved him was also a goal he intended to achieve. Prophecies may seem elusive, but they follow logic and causality. Atticus refused to believe such events occurred merely due to bad luck. "Very well, open it, Miss Corona. I can't wait to see what's inside," Atticus said, shaking his wand from his sleeve and stepping back a few paces. Strangely, Vitia did not act immediately. Instead, she pointed her cane at the massive stone door before them. "Before entering the ruins, we will encounter some obstacles, Mr. Blaine. You need to be mentally prepared," Vitia explained, her eyelashes trembling as she stared at the stone gate. "When the stone pillar returns to its place, this stone gate will transform into its original form, the Mirror of Erised. I think you must have heard of it." "I've heard the rumors," Atticus Blaine muttered, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "The Mirror of Erised, a mirror that reflects one's innermost desires." Though his face remained impassive, his heart was anything but calm. He employed a clumency to mask his astonishment, concealing it deep within his mind. "The Mirror of Erised has 2 sides," he continued. "One side reveals a person's deepest desires, while the other serves as a gateway to the relic. Only those who dare to confront the past they most wish to avoid can enter." Atticus frowned HTLE, sifting through his memories, both those he wished to forget and those concerning the Mirror of Erised. The mirror's existence was no secret. It was mentioned in numerous books about legendary alchemical artifacts, each describing its ability to reflect the human heart. Yet, this was the first time Atticus had heard of its dual nature. He pondered why this mysterious ruin, which he had never entered, used the Mirror of Erised as its door. The magical community held no consensus on the mirror's creator. Even if Vitia claimed Merlin himself had crafted it, Atticus wouldn't be surprised. The name Eris was familiar even to many Muggles. In Greek mythology, Eris was the sister of Ares, the god of war, and the daughter of Zeus and Hera, the goddess of strife and discord. Her most famous myth was the Golden Apple controversy. As these thoughts raced through his mind, Atticus's eyelids twitched. Without a clumency's emotional shield, he might have turned pale with shock. Words like island, golden apple, and druidism flashed through his mind, leading him to a startling realization. Since learning of the place of Merlin's eternal rest from the enigmatic woman, Atticus had dismissed it as a mere tale. But now, he wasn't so sure. The ancient Druid's central belief, the legendary island of King Arthur, the ideal homeland in Muggle Celtic mythology, Avalon, was also known as the Golden Apple Island. Could it be that behind this door lay the place of Merlin's eternal sleep? In mere moments, Atticus's palms were slick with sweat. He resisted the urge to question Vitia, but his mind was in turmoil. Vitia sensed his unease, but remained silent. She glanced around cautiously, then raised her staff, pointing to the endless night sky. A brilliant, holy white light illuminated the darkness. Atticus took a deep breath, allowing his rational mind to regain control. He remained silent, his nerves taut, focusing intently on Vitia's actions. He had every reason to be wary. The druid priestess, bathed in ethereal light and shadow, harbored too many secrets. He couldn't afford to let his guard down. Author's note: in the next chapter, I'll explore the second storyline. Please continue to support and encourage me. End of this chapter. Chapter 112. At the end of October 1979, as night began to fall, the streets and alleys of Edinburgh, the capital of Scotland, were alive with a festive spirit. Even an unexpected and unseasonable thunderstorm couldn't dampen the celebrations. Amidst the torrential rain, the Palace of Holyrood House, standing proudly at the end of the Royal Mile, was brightly illuminated. The dense curtain of rain cast a hazy veil over the ancient palace, steeped in history, yet it couldn't mask the chilling and ominous atmosphere that lingered around it. A loud, piercing sound echoed as the palace garage doors swung open, overpowering the sound of billions of raindrops hitting the ground. 13 pitch-black cars emerged, one after another, from the garage. Following a predetermined route, they cut through the rain and vanished into the night. Tonight, the holy bush would defend the glory of the Lord. In the heart of the new city, the sound of joyful birthday hymns filled a 3-story Georgian-style building. Jack-o'-lanterns hung from the eaves outside, swaying in the wind and rain, their rhythmic dance seemingly celebrating the little owner inside. In the fireplace by the wall, neatly stacked oak logs burned brightly. Opposite the fireplace, mistletoe surrounded golden apples adorned with thousands of peculiar golden acorns, casting a radiant glow in the firelight. Mr. Hill, leaning against the windowsill, tore his gaze away from the endless darkness outside and turned to look at the dining room. Seated at the long table was his daughter, wearing a golden veil dress and a crown of vines on her head, her face alight with joy. His eyes were filled with boundless love for her, yet a shadow of sadness lingered on his handsome face. "Honey?" Mrs. Hill, graceful and poised, gently brushed her daughter's temples. She noticed her husband's unease, and, while their daughter chatted with her parents, hurried to the window, attempting to dispel his worries with a smile. "This is a rare opportunity for us to be together, my dear. You should spend more time with your family." "Sorry, Heya," Mr. Hill replied, forcing a smile. He glanced outside at the storm and the rumbling noise once more. After a long pause, he sighed heavily. "I just feel uneasy, Heya. I have this nagging feeling that something is going to happen." Mrs. Hill placed her slender hand over Mr. Hill's heart, feeling the erratic heartbeat beneath her palm. She sighed softly. "I know what you're worried about, honey, but—" She glanced at their daughter, who had leapt into her father's arms, playfully demanding attention. Lowering her eyes, she sighed again. "This is her wish, dear. She wants to spend this birthday with her grandparents. You know the burden she will carry in the future, and I can't refuse her." Mr. Hill remained silent, gazing at his lovely, innocent daughter, who seemed like a sprite. Deep within his light green eyes, there was not only heartache, but also a flicker of hatred. "When I return, I plan to convince the teacher to lead all the disciples out of the jungle. There are many signs indicating it's no longer safe." After a prolonged silence, Mr. Hill's words caused Mrs. Hill to frown. "Where do you intend to go? Where will we live?" "The forbidden forest of Hogwarts is ideal for us. The centaurs won't be a problem. We all revere nature and the stars, and we can coexist peacefully with them." Mrs. Hill withdrew her hand from her husband's chest, her frown deepening. After a brief silence, she directly addressed the underlying reason for her husband's concern. Atticus Blaine wanted to hide. "You seek the blessing of that wizard, Albus Dumbledore, dear?" his wife inquired. "That's for the best, isn't it?" Atticus replied, unfazed that his intentions were transparent to her. He continued candidly, "Dumbledore's strength and generosity are well known. If we can secure his blessing, it might give us some breathing room. We could handle things without so much anxiety." "In ordinary times, I might support your bold endeavor, my dear," his wife interjected, or he could finish. "But you and I both know that now is not the right time. The wizards are facing significant troubles themselves. The one they call He Who Must Not Be Named is causing chaos in their world. Albus Dumbledore is already overwhelmed. If he were to openly support us now— Rumble! A flash of lightning illuminated the sky, and the thunder drowned out the ominous footsteps of death approaching. As the rumbling subsided, Mrs. Hill continued, "Do you think he would risk making another enemy he might not be able to handle?" Atticus's breathing quickened. He had considered this, but hope lingered in his heart. "Dumbledore is a kind wizard. You know we and the wizards were once united. He won't let us perish." "That was over a dozen centuries ago, my dear. We've long since parted ways with them. Dumbledore may be noble and might sympathize with our plight, but I doubt he's so kind as to be foolish. He never would be." "Dad, Mom?" The tension between them affected others in the room. Vitia, seated at the dining table, was reminded by her grandparents. She tilted her head, her innocent eyes gazing toward the hall. "Go and bring back your mom and dad, sweet elf," her grandfather whispered gently. Vitia, prompted by his words, leaped from his arms, her antics bringing laughter to the room. The Hill couple took a deep breath, easing the tension between them. Atticus opened his arms, welcoming his daughter with a smile that matched her rosy cheeks. Boom! Suddenly, the ground shook violently. The space above the first floor vanished as if swept away by a giant pendulum. In the sudden darkness, a beam of pure white light descended from the sky, piercing the chaos below. Bright red blood, piercing screams, and cold weeping echoed, even overpowering the thunder. "I will have my revenge." In the ruins, a little girl stood, crying helplessly among blood-stained acorns. Lifeless bodies lay around her, their hands reaching out feebly. "I will definitely kill you." Her young voice, filled with deep-seated hatred, made an unyielding vow to fate. Though determined, she could not command her body to move. "Wicked heretics," a cold voice declared from the rain. The chilling holy light flickered again, momentarily dispelling the darkness, attempting to extinguish all seeds of resistance. Inside the shattered fireplace, the charred oak suddenly glowed with vibrant green light. A small bud emerged, stretching from the ashes that symbolized death. "Sorry, Vitia." The old priest, with green hair and eyes, ignored the cries of believers impaled by treetops. He approached Vitia, gently embracing her frail shoulders, as rain mixed with tears and sweat streamed down his weathered face. "Why, teacher? Why didn't they let us go?" The little girl no longer held back her sobs, her tears flowing freely. "We have nearly forgotten where this hatred began, Vitia, and we are uncertain of when it will end," the old priest spoke with a sorrowful tone, his emerald eyes reflecting a steadfast resolve. "The only course of action left to us is to fight until the very end." End of chapter. Chapter 1 and 13, The Colorless Realm. Standing before the arch-shaped water mirror, its edges adorned with a circle of golden runes, Vitia showed no sign of emotion as the image within dimmed. She turned to face Atticus Blaine, who was observing her with a complex expression. With a slight nod, she said, "I will be waiting for you at the temple in the center of the island, Mr. Blaine." Without waiting for his response, Vitia stepped into the rippling water mirror and vanished from Atticus's magical perception. In the middle of the night, a cool breeze swept across the plain, tousling Atticus's messy gray hair as he stood bathed in starlight. He remained motionless, his dark eyes fixed on the mirror's surface. Doubt began to creep into his heart about the decision he was about to make. The complications surrounding this woman were greater than he had anticipated, and he questioned whether his determination to unravel the prophecy's connection to himself was leading him into treacherous waters. Yet a persistent voice in his mind urged him to enter the world beyond the mirror, warning that he would regret it for the rest of his life if he did not. This almost prophetic intuition was impossible to ignore. Despite his hesitation, Atticus found himself standing before the enigmatic Mirror of Erised. As a low hum filled the air, the clear water mirror gradually blurred. Within seconds, an image materialized before him, causing his eyebrows to arch in surprise. In this icy world, snowflakes drifted slowly from a gloomy sky, and the biting cold wind seemed to be the only movement on the frozen ground. London lay trapped in a rare, harsh winter. A scrawny, ragged woman in her early 20s, her matted hair frozen into clumps, staggered through the city streets, clutching a swaddled baby. Her eyes, devoid of emotion, revealed her aimlessness. The newborn, less than 2 days old, struggled to open its eyes and gazed skyward, its cries more akin to a dying whimper. Atticus stood silently before the mirror of Ericid, watching the flickering light and shadow within. Memories he thought long forgotten surged within him like molten lava. In a daze, he felt transported back to the first and most powerless moment he had experienced in this world. "How tragic," he murmured, his voice dissipating into the starry plain. Unlike the sensation of being squeezed through a soft rubber tube, this felt more like time travel. He lost all sense of his body, leaving only a mass of thoughts encased in a bubble, hurtling through the ocean of space at unimaginable speed. In this state, time was imperceptible, and Atticus could only drift along, his focus locked on a distant white light that seemed forever out of reach. His consciousness began to fade in the monotonous world. Ding! As if awakening from a dream, the ethereal and crisp sound of wind chimes suddenly rang in his ears, reviving Atticus's dormant consciousness. He looked around instinctively, searching for the source of the sound, but found nothing man-made in the boundless space except for the door behind him. Suddenly, Atticus felt a shift. He glanced down and realized that he was not standing on solid ground, but on an endless lake, its surface as reflective as a mirror. Frowning, he raised his toes to touch the water, which mirrored his image back at him. The figure standing before him was none other than the legendary wizard, Atticus Blaine. Atticus was renowned for his unparalleled magical prowess and his fiery red hair, which seemed to blaze like a living flame. His presence here, in this enigmatic realm, was as unexpected as it was astonishing. Atticus Blaine stood tall, his retro-style wizard robe fluttering slightly in the ethereal breeze that seemed to emanate from nowhere. Unlike Atticus, the mysterious force that drained color from everything around them had no effect on him. His vibrant appearance remained untouched, a stark contrast to the monochrome reflection that had so unsettled Atticus earlier. Atticus's mind raced as he tried to comprehend the situation. The secrecy realm, with its distorted time and space, was a place of ancient magic, a place where the rules of reality seemed to bend and twist. Yet here was Atticus Blaine, a figure from history, standing as if he had just stepped out of a painting. "Atticus Blaine," Atticus finally managed to say, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. "How is this possible? You should not be here." Atticus Blaine turned his head, his eyes meeting Atticus's with a knowing smile. "Ah, young wizard," he said, his voice deep and resonant, "the mysteries of magic are vast and unfathomable. This realm is but a fragment of the greater tapestry of magic that binds our world." Atticus felt a shiver run down his spine. The presence of such a legendary figure was both intimidating and exhilarating. He had read countless tales of Atticus Blaine's exploits, but to see him in the flesh, in this strange and timeless place, was beyond anything he had imagined. "Why are you here?" Atticus asked, his curiosity overcoming his initial shock. Atticus Blaine chuckled softly, the sound echoing across the still lake. "I am here for the same reason you are, young one, to uncover the secrets of this realm and to understand the forces that govern it. But beware, for this place holds dangers that even the most skilled wizards may find challenging." Atticus nodded, his resolve strengthening. He knew that the path ahead would not be easy, but with Atticus Blaine by his side, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they would unravel the mysteries of this ancient and powerful realm, and perhaps, in doing so, discover truths that had been lost to time. Not only him, but likely every wizard in the world knew of this man. Godric Gryffindor? End of chapter. Chapter 114, Gryffindor. Atticus Blaine knew that his current expression must be utterly ridiculous, but he simply couldn't close his mouth, which hung open in shock. He stared at the middle-aged man with fiery red hair, who was cloaked in an air of disdain and kept rubbing his eyes, convinced he was hallucinating. "How can this be possible?" Atticus whispered to himself, desperately trying to comprehend the absurd scene before him. The only explanation he could muster was that he was under some illusion magic, but even that seemed implausible. He sensed an abnormal flow of time in the space around him, yet that didn't justify Godric Gryffindor standing alive before him. Gryffindor was one of the 4 legendary founders of Hogwarts, a wizard so revered that he was nearly deified a millennium ago. His thoughts and ideals continued to profoundly influence the wizarding world even after 1,000 years. What kind of power could bring Godric Gryffindor across the ages to stand before him? A time-turner? The thought flitted through Atticus's mind, only to be dismissed almost instantly. It was laughable. No time-turner could affect a wizard of Gryffindor's immense power, as deep and unfathomable as the ocean. Even if Dumbledore, or Atticus himself, harnessed the combined power of all the time-turners in existence, they might not be able to turn back time by even a single day. The past is fixed, while the future holds countless possibilities. Time-turners can only navigate the past, not the future, especially not a millennium into it. Not even the most ancient and powerful magic could achieve such a feat. "Who are you?" Atticus demanded, his voice trembling like the first light of dawn. Cold sweat, like dewdrops on green leaves, beaded on his forehead. He panted slightly, his mind racing through thoughts of the Merlin ruins, Vitia Corona, and the prophecy, all of which seemed to fade into insignificance. His brown eyes narrowed to pinpoints as he focused intently on the man standing not far from him. The man, who had appeared so suddenly, seemed oblivious to Atticus Blaine's presence. He surveyed his surroundings with a keen interest, standing still, yet the entire ruin seemed to be on high alert because of him. His fiery red hair, the sword scars on his broad face, his knight-like physique, and the exquisite mithril rapier at his waist, all these details pointed to him being Godric Gryffindor. But wait, that sword. Atticus's body trembled momentarily, his eyes wide with astonishment. The sword at this man's waist was not the sword of Gryffindor. A few months ago, in the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets, Atticus had witnessed Potter wielding the legendary sword against the basilisk. That sword was a gleaming silver, with a hilt adorned with dazzling, egg-sized rubies, and its design was distinctly fairy-like. The mysterious man before him did carry a silver sword, but its hilt was unadorned, and its design was plain, more suited for actual combat than display. Atticus's lips pressed into a thin line as the horror in his eyes gradually gave way to a predatory gleam. Could it be that this man merely resembled Gryffindor and was a fervent admirer, deliberately adopting his appearance? This explanation seemed far more reasonable and acceptable than the notion of Gryffindor himself traveling across a millennium to the present. Yet Atticus remained cautious, for he could not sense any power emanating from this man. The magic power was overshadowed by the intense aura of danger that Atticus Blaine exuded, a level of intimidation even Albus Dumbledore couldn't match. He wanted to inquire about the man's identity again, but before he could speak, the man's words had already answered Atticus's doubts, piercing his inner defenses once more. Without any warning, the red-haired man, who had been staring at him, suddenly looked up at the pure gray sky above, devoid of clouds or mist. Then he grinned and said, "I found you." "Ha! It seems that the broken pillar Rowena discovered and Helga's prophecy were correct." Rowena and Helga. Atticus could no longer deceive himself. This man was indeed Godric Gryffindor. But this brought him back to the original question. How did Gryffindor manage it? "Mr. Gryffindor, you." Atticus's voice was dry, and he spoke with great difficulty. Yet the red-haired man ignored him, instead drawing the silver sword at his waist with a swift motion. Under Atticus's suddenly vigilant gaze, Gryffindor waved his hand and summoned a lion, half the size of a normal one, just with eyes like rubies, and a mane as bright red as flames. The majestic lion's presence was both relaxed and natural, subverting an inherent belief in Atticus's mind. He wasn't surprised that Gryffindor could use the silver sword as a magic wand. Mithril, a magical metal with excellent conductivity, was rare and expensive, and its compatibility with modern magic wasn't as high as wooden wands, leading to its gradual decline in use. Nor was Atticus surprised that Gryffindor's Patronus was a magical creature. Many historical records sporadically mention such occurrences. Although magical creatures as Patronuses are rare, they are not unique. Just like Dumbledore's Silver Phoenix and his own Patronus, they are magical creatures. What astonished Atticus was how Gryffindor could ride his Patronus. The Patronus charm, known as a powerful defense against Dementors, is a highly advanced form of white magic. The core of this spell is not just pure magic power, but the positive relationship between magic and the wizard's heart, a product of their harmonious strength. Of course, the Patronus can serve other purposes, such as acting as a messenger with certain spellcasting skills. However, using the Patronus as a mount? Atticus couldn't comprehend it, as the Patronus is a magical creation without a physical body. As a wizard with such exceptional talent in magic that even Dumbledore called it unique, and with outstanding magical perception, Atticus could usually discern the general principles of most magic at a glance. Yet, with Gryffindor's Patronus, Atticus had to admit he had no idea how it was done, just as he couldn't sense the magic within Gryffindor at all. Godric Gryffindor wasn't inclined to explain the principles of his magic. In fact, from beginning to end, he never acknowledged Atticus, as if he didn't exist. Gryffindor looked up, his square face set with piercing eyes locked on the sky. With a leap, the Patronus beneath him carried him into the boundless sky. Atticus's eyes followed, and suddenly they narrowed slightly as he made a new discovery. Under the gray sky, at the far end of his vision, there was a very inconspicuous little black spot. Outside, one might mistake it for a muggle plane or a bird, but in this empty expanse, it was indeed unusual. Avalon Island is actually in the sky, Atticus muttered through clenched teeth, but he didn't have the energy to dwell on it. His gaze remained fixed on the fiery red lion rapidly shrinking in his vision. Atticus Blaine took a deep breath, preparing himself for the next step. Seconds later, he sprang forward, transforming into a shadowy figure that soared into the sky. End of this chapter. Chapter 115, The Call. In a world shrouded in gray and lifelessness, two figures, one clad in red, the other in gray, soared through the sky like meteors ascending from the earth. Mr. Gryffindor. Atticus Blaine's voice pierced through the howling wind, yet the red-haired man seemed oblivious, his gaze fixed solely on the island floating above. Atticus closed his mouth, the biting wind momentarily distracting him from the surreal reality that Godric Gryffindor stood before him, alive. His mind, momentarily stalled by disbelief, began to churn once more. Gryffindor was neither deaf nor blind. Surely he would acknowledge the presence of another living being beside him, even if Atticus appeared as insignificant as a slug in his eyes. What state was Gryffindor truly in? Did he genuinely exist? Atticus soon abandoned these thoughts as he crossed an invisible boundary. His expression shifted dramatically, nearly causing him to revert from his shadowy form to human. The air was thick with the potent magic of death and decay, making the space feel viscous. Atticus felt like a diver crashing into water from a great height, the repulsive yet irresistible magic failing to render him unconscious. At that moment, Gryffindor, who rode atop his lion Patronus with ease, grew solemn. He raised his silver sword, slashing repeatedly at the void ahead. No dazzling spell light accompanied his strikes, yet with each swing the oppressive darkness receded, revealing a clearer space, like murky water parting to expose a pristine lake surface. Behind him, Atticus, who had been on the verge of suffocation, exhaled heavily. He dared not linger and followed the cleared path Gryffindor had carved. The scene was bizarre. Atticus, though not deeply versed in druidic lore, knew the sect revered nature. From Vitia, he sensed a natural freshness and vitality. Why then was Avalon, the legendary druidic haven, cloaked in such intense death and decay? What secrets lay within the Merlin ruins Vitia mentioned? Was Merlin's corpse truly absent? As the two figures advanced rapidly, the black speck in their vision grew larger. Within 10 minutes, Atticus could discern the outline of Avalon Island, finally understanding its moniker, Apple Island. From below, the island's massive form indeed resembled an apple. Suspended above the sky by unimaginable power, this sight was one Atticus knew he would never forget. In a daze, he recalled the day Professor Snape visited his orphanage, demonstrating magic in the dormitory. A simple transfiguration had shattered Atticus's understanding of the world. Now, he faced that same sense of wonder and disbelief. It's unbelievable. How did it happen? Atticus mused, viewing the island through a magical lens. He felt as if one foot remained in the magical world, while the other stepped into the realm of myth. Admiring this otherworldly magic as a bystander would undoubtedly fill Atticus with awe and admiration. However, the thought of his entanglement with such a monumental relic weighed heavily on his heart. He sensed an invisible, terrifying hand pulling him into the mire, threatening to consume him. In truth, he was already ensnared in the mud. Now the monster lurking in the mud finally turned its attention to him, extending its ferocious giant claws. A sudden wave of dizziness hit Atticus Blaine unexpectedly. The world around him shook violently, and the powerful magical magnetic field surrounding him underwent drastic changes. In an instant, he was expelled from this turbulent magical environment, revealing his original form from the shadow state. The world shifted dramatically. What was once above him, the massive island, now lay beneath his feet. As he entered this magical relic, the boundless lake he had been standing on suddenly appeared above his head, transforming into a pure sky. Gryffindor seemed to have anticipated this change. He merely curled his lips, muttered something about it being interesting, and firmly grasped the lion's fiery mane with his left hand, leading the charge toward the island. Below, however, Atticus faced significant trouble. The chaotic magical magnetic field and the suddenly intensified evil magic around him exerted immense pressure, causing him to plummet through the air. He cast several spells in quick succession to halt his fall, but each attempt failed, sparks crackling futilely from the tip of his wand. Ridiculous, he thought. Am I going to fall to my death here? Gritting his teeth, Atticus looked down at the ground below, his eyes filled with hatred as he saw countless gray smoke columns rising. Suppressing his shock, he shook his wand once more. The deadly air beneath him suddenly became turbulent, and the oncoming hurricane gradually slowed his descent. Finally, when he was just 10 feet from the ground, Atticus regained control and landed with a splash in the mud. It took a few seconds for the dazed Atticus to stand up from the muck. He glanced at the scene before him, and as he was about to lift his wand to clean off the mud, he froze. Atticus had never witnessed the end of the world, but he believed that if it ever came, it would look just like this. What was once a lush forest had become a cemetery of life. The towering trees had all been broken and lay submerged, with only sparse, charred wood standing precariously in the endless swamp. The air was thick with rising mist, and the eerie wails of ghostly women filled his ears. Everything in sight was obscure and difficult to comprehend, like the transition between day and night during a storm. The deadly and ominous magic weighed heavily on Atticus's emotions, causing despair to rise uncontrollably within him. Yet, amidst this terrifying scene, a glimmer of understanding emerged in Atticus's heart. He had a faint suspicion that the devastation before him was likely the result of Vitia Cleona's ambitions, a legendary magical item taken from the Isle of Avalon. With its power, maybe we can find a peaceful place to stay, Vitia had once told him. At the time, Atticus had dismissed the idea, but now he dared not underestimate it. Several generations of druid priests have entered this world many times, but failed to retrieve it. The prophecy says, "Only I can take out that item," Atticus murmured softly, his eyes downcast, feeling an inexplicable unease. He realized that he might have stumbled upon one of the most profound mysteries of the magical world. Gryffindor stood on the embankment behind Atticus, also gazing at the distant, mist-shrouded area. The world, once full of joy and life, now lay dying. The relaxed expression on his square face, marked by several sword scars, had vanished, replaced by a solemn demeanor. The twinkle in his eyes was not one of joy but of anger. Despite his immense power, Atticus Blaine felt helpless in the face of this wretched world, able only to let out a faint sigh. He turned to look at Gryffindor, who had left him in unprecedented shock, yet seemed oblivious to his presence. Atticus's gaze was filled with an inexplicable mix of emotions. After a moment, he suddenly raised his wand, and with a swift and decisive motion, aimed it directly at Godric Gryffindor. End of this chapter. Chapter 116, The Call of the Past. A withered branch floated up from the water. With a swift motion of Atticus Blaine's arm, the branch sliced through the air, charged with an eerie stillness, and landed at Godric Gryffindor's feet. The branch passed through Gryffindor's foot and embedded itself into the ground, leaving no trace of blood. "Is it still an illusion?" Atticus murmured, relieved as he observed the branch quivering and Gryffindor's unchanged expression. Speaking to Godric Gryffindor, one of the legendary founders of Hogwarts, was no small feat. It required immense courage to confront such a figure, even if it was just a phantom. Atticus scrutinized the path before him, finding no flaws. The apparition seemed almost real, yet his heart was clouded with confusion. No magical text he had ever read described a situation like this, and there was no one to explain it to him. He had to rely on his own intellect to unravel the mystery. There is no doubt that Godric Gryffindor once ventured into this secret realm long ago, Atticus mused quietly, his eyes narrowing as if piercing through the veils of time. The chaotic nature of this realm has captured his presence, manifesting a phantom before me. He recalled the effect of Gryffindor's sword slicing through the air. I understand now, he whispered to himself. I exist within the echoes of his exploration. Those clean cracks were created by Gryffindor thousands of years ago. What a formidable wizard. If Atticus himself could cast a spell that lasted millennia, it would be a remarkable feat. Spells that align with the natural order and sustain themselves can indeed endure, but in this peculiar magical environment, no spell should withstand the decay of death. Did the ancestors of the Druids also witness Gryffindor's phantom, or is it just me? Atticus pondered, feeling a vague certainty that Vitia and her ancestors had never seen Gryffindor's traces. Otherwise, they would have sought help from Hogwarts. But why such a coincidence? Atticus wondered. He didn't believe Gryffindor's phantom appeared by chance as soon as he entered the secret realm. Suddenly, a thought struck him. Could it be the magical explosion on the lake that summoned Gryffindor? Was he waiting for me? Although he had some understanding of Gryffindor's state, many questions remained. Why was Gryffindor interested in the island of Avalon? He muttered to himself, the stone pillar Rowena found, Helga's prophecy. The founders were likely orchestrating something significant millennia ago. Avalon Island, revered by the Druid sect for its life-affirming beliefs, now lay in ruin. Yet Vitia referred to it as the place where Merlin sleeps forever, a result of her ancestors' divinations. All these elements seemed intricately connected to Atticus. As Atticus pondered, Gryffindor's phantom, scanning the surroundings, appeared to notice something. He dismissed his Patronus and began walking along the embankment. Atticus, suppressing his doubts, quickly extricated himself from the muddy shore and followed closely behind. They walked for about 2 minutes before a simple yet exquisitely crafted oak boat came into view. So far, the journey had only deepened the mystery. Atticus Blaine was now utterly convinced that the sky island he found himself on was none other than the mythical Avalon. Both Muggle and wizarding texts described Avalon as being surrounded by swamps, forests, and mist, with its center accessible only by boat. For a legendary wizard like Godric Gryffindor, the pervasive magic of death and decay here posed little challenge. He could have easily flown over the swamp beneath the mist, riding his Patronus with the same ease as one might stroll through a city. Yet, he chose not to. Upon entering the island, Gryffindor became uncharacteristically silent. His eyes, deep and contemplative, scanned the island as if he were brewing some inner resolve. With a graceful leap, Gryffindor stepped onto the boat. Remarkably, the waterline of the oak vessel remained unchanged, and the ow hull did not so much as tremble. However, when Atticus jumped aboard, the boat sank 2 feet, confirming his suspicion that the Gryffindor before him was not in his corporeal form. The small boat seemed designed for a single occupant. Gryffindor stood in the center of the cabin, leaving Atticus to crouch awkwardly at the stern. Despite Gryffindor's current form being less substantial than a ghost, Atticus could have passed through him to sit more comfortably. Yet, out of caution and respect for the legendary wizard, he refrained. He gazed at Gryffindor's back, his eyes filled with admiration. Months earlier, while teaching at Hogwarts, Atticus had discussed his mysterious purple eyes with Potter and Granger. They had been incredulous when he spoke of contending with a wizard like Dumbledore, likely believing it an impossible feat. However, Atticus held firm in his belief that even the most powerful legends could be surpassed by future generations. Yet, witnessing the mere tip of Gryffindor's power, Atticus had to admit he was at a loss as to how he could ever match such a formidable wizard. As the oak boat glided smoothly towards the swamp's center, as if skating on ice, Atticus, like Gryffindor, became captivated by the scene unfolding in the swamp. In the shallow waters, suspended in the mist, lay the remains of numerous magical creatures. Though not an expert, Atticus recognized the bones of 3-headed dogs, fire dragons, unicorns, Pegasus, and leprechauns. These creatures, once sworn enemies, had coexisted peacefully here long ago, only to be slain by the island's malevolent magic. Amidst the mist, a colossal human skeleton gradually emerged. It appeared to belong to a giant, yet it dwarfed the existing giants of the magical world, standing as tall as a newly constructed 6-story dormitory at the orphanage. In silent awe, Atticus, staring at the skeleton, quietly parted his lips. Chapter 117, Death Island. This time, not only Atticus Blaine, but even Gryffindor, whose expression was as firm as a rock, showed a certain degree of astonishment. Their eyes were simultaneously drawn to the enormous skeleton before them. Atticus felt as though he had been stripped from reality. The oak boat beneath his feet was not merely gliding through the swamp, it was traversing the long river of time. Wonders from the ancient wizarding era, older than a millennium, seemed to manifest before him. The mottled light and shadows leaking through the gaps of time alone left Atticus profoundly shaken. The world was still complete, the magnificent era of magic. Gryffindor finally spoke, his voice filled with emotion. However, his unconscious murmur made Atticus frown. What did it mean that the world was still complete in the age of magic? Was there a gap in the world today? Atticus suddenly regretted spending most of his time studying spell models in Professor Binns's History of Magic class. If he had listened more carefully, he might have understood Gryffindor's words. However, these unknown secrets likely extended far beyond the history of magic, as revised by modern wizards. Even in the era of the Big Four, they were probably top secrets known to very few. The eerie howls of female ghosts faded, and the world fell into an eternal silence. The boat carrying the two of them sailed into a denser fog, where visibility was extremely low. Atticus could only see within 10 feet of him. Gryffindor swung his long sword again, slashing through the space in front of him to dispel the malevolent breath of death in the air. Atticus wondered whether the ancestors of the Druids who first came here had followed the same path as Gryffindor. Many traces of time had led them to the center of Avalon Island. If not, Atticus couldn't fathom the price they would have paid to reach this point step by step. If Atticus had ventured here alone without any external aid, it would have been impossible to arrive in just a few days. Thanks to Vitia, who thought highly of herself, believing she could handle the dangers of the ruins. At that moment, numerous fist-sized dim lights appeared in the hazy mist, like lanterns floating in the air, swaying slightly. Atticus became instantly vigilant. Since entering the island, he hadn't seen anything moving except Gryffindor. He raised his wand, staring at the dim yellow lanterns surrounding him, trying to guess what they were. Subconsciously, he stood up from his half-squatting position, placing one foot on the side of the smoothly moving oak boat. Half of his body leaned out over the waveless water, which mirrored like silver. The shaking frequency of those lanterns gradually increased, and hundreds of dim light clusters exuded a mysterious magical power. Atticus sensed something was amiss, feeling a strong allure from the magic. As he attempted to forcibly break his gaze and retract his body, the light clusters suddenly brightened as if stimulated by something. Caught off guard, Atticus felt dizzy, lost his balance, and fell directly into the lake. Rumble. Like a drop of water falling onto a hot oil pan, the calm lake and the mist above it boiled like water just brought to a boil, and the world suddenly shook. What a shame. The moment his body lost balance, Atticus knew he had been ensnared. At the same time, he realized what those lanterns were, a group of shinkpunks, creatures that thrived in swamps. The bewitching wizard narrowly escaped death due to the peculiar state between phantom and reality, unexpectedly strengthened several times under the influence. Atticus Blaine wielded the formidable magic of death and decay. As a powerful wizard, his skills were unparalleled. It took him less than 3 seconds to fall into the water, flip over, and climb back onto the boat. Yet, the world around him continued to tremble, growing more chaotic by the moment. "Mr. Gryffindor," Atticus called out, eyeing the writhing bones surrounding him with a mix of joy and trepidation. "Can you make this boat go faster? I seem to have stirred up some trouble." Godric Gryffindor, unaffected by the reanimated bones, remained indifferent. He existed outside the current time and space, unable to offer Atticus any assistance. The world of eternal scars was eerily silent. A sudden gust of wind whipped across the shallow lake, stirring up waves and dispersing the surrounding fog. The bones of a three-headed dog, a fire dragon, and a pegasus rose, along with a colossal titan-like skeleton, its empty eye sockets fixed on Atticus. The intentions of this undead army were clear. "If Thanatos saw you, he'd be drooling," Atticus quipped, suppressing his panic. Magic surged from his body, causing his wizard robe to billow, and his light brown eyes gleamed with determination. The bone giant let out a deafening roar, and the ominous magic in the wind and waves tainted even Gryffindor's pure land, once again subjecting Atticus to the oppressive breath of death. The fire dragon roared from above, while the three-headed dog bared its teeth, charging across the wave crests. In an instant, Atticus found himself surrounded. As the leading bone fire dragon closed in within 100 feet of the oak boat, Atticus swung his wand sharply. With a piercing hiss, a giant anaconda emerged from the churning waters, towering over the scene. Its massive tail swung with force, smashing the fire dragons and three-headed dogs into bone fragments that scattered through the air. In the sparsely scorched forest, two colossal beings faced each other, the tension between them palpable. A powerful shockwave, like a meteor striking the earth, swept through, overturning everything in sight. The bone giant reached out with its mountain-like hands, grasping the head of the anaconda conjured by Atticus. With a snap, it crushed the anaconda's head. Unfazed, Atticus continued to wield his wand, and the scattered water droplets reformed into the anaconda's head. The massive creature rose again, coiling around the bone giant and squeezing with all its might. The sight of these two epic magical creations clashing directly was soul-stirring. Atticus stood within the white barrier, protecting the oak boat, his gray hair fluttering and cheeks flushed with excitement. "Show me what you've got, big guy," he shouted, his eyes alight with exhilaration. Magic fire erupted from the tip of his ebony wand, igniting the lake and turning the gray sky a brilliant gold. In mere moments, another giant golden flame snake, as large as a mountain, descended into the world, its roar causing ripples in the fabric of space. The two colossal serpents coiled around the bone giant's arms, one on the left and the other on the right, tightening their grip on the massive skeleton. With all its might, the earth seemed to tremble, producing endless rumbling noises that echoed like the collapse of mountains. Waves of sound filled the air, accompanied by the shocking clamor of twisted iron and steel. The bone giant roared repeatedly, but each time it crushed the heads of the water and fire serpents. Atticus Blaine swiftly repaired them, continuing the fierce battle. To be honest, since his days at Hogwarts and the intense confrontation with the Dark Witch in the Forbidden Forest, this was the first time Atticus had unleashed his full strength in such a raw and unrestrained manner. The boat pressed onward, and in the distance, the vague outline of a magnificent and majestic temple began to emerge. Note, my heart is broken after subscribing. End of this chapter. Chapter 118, Temple and Murals. After a devastating war that ravaged the earth, the world lay in chaos. Atticus Blaine leaped from the oak boat, landing on the embankment. He wiped the sweat from his brow and retrieved a few bottles of a costly magic potion, each worth several thousand galleons. After downing the potion, Atticus smacked his lips, still unsatisfied. As soon as he set foot on the ground, the bones that had been stirring in the swamp fell into a dormant state, as if he had passed a trial through sheer strength. With a clang, he discarded the empty bottles and surveyed the nearly plowed swamp. Atticus exhaled with relief, but a wry smile crossed his face as he sensed the magic within him. "That was exhilarating," he mused, "but I hope it doesn't foretell any future troubles." He nudged an ugly one-legged creature at his feet, bound by a magic rope. It grimaced in pain. Under the influence of the island's potent evil magic, these hinklepunks had taken on a tangible form. This was a rare occurrence, so Atticus decided to capture one for further study, unaffected by the recent battle. After securing the peculiar hinklepunk, Atticus noticed that Gryffindor had already ascended a gentle slope lined with withered thorns and was nearing a vantage point to observe the temple in the distance. Not wanting to fall behind, Atticus hurried after him. Despite being a mere phantom recorded by chaotic time and magic, following Gryffindor gave Atticus an inexplicable sense of security. Godric Gryffindor was indeed a reassuring presence. In the island's center stood a colossal, majestic temple, steeped in history and silent witness to countless years. Atticus's eyelashes fluttered with doubt as he gazed at it. The rectangular temple, perched atop steps, was constructed entirely of white marble. Nearly 100 giant marble pillars supported the vast structure, though the main wall had crumbled, leaving a gaping hole. This was a classic ancient Greek-style temple, which puzzled Atticus. How could a Greek temple exist at the heart of Avalon, the sacred site of the ancient Druids? The palace's style was bizarre and defied logic. He had expected to find a wooden palace atop a massive oak tree. "Is Corona there?" Atticus wondered aloud, peering over Gryffindor's broad shoulders and sensing her magical presence. After a moment's thought, he waved his wand to cloak his presence, intending to explore alongside Gryffindor before encountering Vidya. Surprisingly, the area surrounding the temple was not suffused with the decay and death Atticus had anticipated. Some mysterious force seemed to suppress these elements. As they resumed their journey, Atticus suddenly halted, his expression grave. Before him appeared numerous overlapping figures, all facing forward. The figure was unmistakably his own silhouette. "The chaos of the time sequence here has intensified significantly," Atticus noted. "It must be the result of two powerful magic forces clashing and interfering with each other, an unprecedented phenomenon." He took another step, but as he neared the temple, the strange occurrence repeated. Gryffindor, however, remained unaffected, his path to the temple unwaveringly straight. Atticus Blaine, trailing behind, seemed to be constantly using apparition. One moment, he was still in Gryffindor's place, and the next, he flickered directly to the front, then floated above Gryffindor's head. Atticus knew without overthinking that this space was distorted and dislocated. Fortunately, the dislocation was continuous. If there had been a spatial fault, he might have stepped forward, only to find the sole of his foot severed in two. The many strange phenomena caused by the magic here could certainly inspire several groundbreaking papers in the magical world. However, after witnessing such occurrences repeatedly, Atticus's nerves had become resilient. After all, this was the land of myths. Gryffindor did not head towards the steps at the temple's entrance. Instead, he stood before a large collapsed hole in the temple's side wall, gazing into the space within. Atticus joined him with some difficulty, glancing around the temple's rear. He didn't marvel at the grand temple supported by magnificent stone pillars, but focused on the dilapidated ground, frowning at the jagged corner. Leaving Gryffindor, he moved forward, squatted on the ground, and dug into the soft soil with his hands, quickly forming a small pit. Indeed, this temple is not an original structure of Avalon Island. The entire temple was forcibly uprooted and relocated here, Atticus mused. If such a majestic building truly belonged to Avalon Island, the builders would have laid a proper foundation. The broken traces at the temple's corner, where it met the ground, confirmed to Atticus that the temple had been moved from elsewhere. "Is this still the wizarding world of Harry Potter?" Atticus shook his head, his expression serious. If Avalon Island was truly the legendary resting place of Merlin, as Vidya claimed, then the temple before him, the many visions on the island, and even the island floating in the sky were undoubtedly Merlin's handiwork. Could it be that Merlin ascended to the throne of God? What were the limits of wizarding abilities in that era? Atticus's eyes reflected disbelief. In the modern magical world, he couldn't fathom the grandeur of a time when wizards looked down upon the earth and were revered as gods by muggles. There has been a fault in the magic, and some extremely important events have been forgotten or deliberately erased, Atticus murmured. His speculation was fueled not only by the sights he had encountered, but also by Gryffindor's unintentional words. The world is still complete, a magnificent age of magic. As he observed the extraordinary craftsmanship before him, Atticus was reminded of Voldemort's actions during his rise to power, which left him feeling somewhat disheartened. Obsessed with power, the awe of others, and immortality, it was no wonder that despite his great strength, Albus Dumbledore always regarded him with disdain. Voldemort had made significant efforts to ensure his survival, but those efforts were mere trifles, and his magical path had long been severed. Suppressing his contempt for Voldemort, Atticus followed Gryffindor and entered the temple through the large hole in the side wall. As he surveyed the scene, the broken walls and ruins matched his expectations. Time and space remained as chaotic as the outside world, but one thing surprised Atticus. The magic within the temple was incredibly pure, untainted by any external influences. The oppressive atmosphere of the outside world seemed to have been cleansed. Atticus Blaine, who had entered this place, behaved somewhat unusually. Typically, anyone exploring this temple for the first time would head straight for the main hall, where Vitia's magical power was concentrated. However, Atticus, with a solemn expression, stepped over the ruins, passed through a cracked wall, quickened his pace, and moved purposefully in a different direction. He hesitated only briefly before deciding to follow. Atticus, a Hogwarts graduate, clearly placed more trust in Godric Gryffindor than in the woman in the hall. Together, they traversed the temple. Along the way, Atticus passed numerous rooms. The ashes and charred shelves suggested a library, while the unidentifiable bones and decayed equipment indicated a place for wizardly research. Additionally, there were rooms for daily living, hinting that this was once a wizard's residence. Gryffindor advanced rapidly, and Atticus, hindered by the chaotic constraints of time and space, had to jog to keep up. After 10 minutes, they overcame many obstacles and stopped before a massive stone wall in a darkened area. Godric Gryffindor was a figure from millennia past, and the era in which this temple was constructed was undoubtedly even older. Despite the ravages of time and magical forces which had left the temple and its main structure in ruins, the enormous stone wall before them remained intact, not even dusted with dirt. "Is this the battle?" Gryffindor remarked with great interest, his unexpected words snapping Atticus out of his puzzlement over the wall's pristine condition. Atticus raised his head, focusing on the wide stone wall. The rough carvings resembled primitive murals etched by ancient peoples on cave walls. The first panel on the far right depicted a landscape of rolling mountains, ancient city-states, and lakes. It seemed a simple scene, yet Atticus was perplexed by an irregular, closed figure at the highest point, far from the earth in the mural. Filled with chaotic lines that suggested wind, it resembled a jellyfish's outline swimming in water. Atticus frowned, scrutinizing the pattern that was neither sun nor cloud, its inscription appearing dark. Though confused, he sensed that this figure might hold great significance. Driven by curiosity, he moved quickly to the second mural, stepping back to take it in. The top of the stone wall still depicted the jellyfish, but the ground scene had changed dramatically. A tense confrontation unfolded on the vast land below. On one side stood a warrior, astride a tall unicorn, a heroic cloak billowing behind him. The warrior wielded a magnificent sword, gazing coldly at the sky. Even from the simple lines, Atticus could feel the regal aura surrounding this warrior, akin to a god of war. Behind the warrior stretched an immense Muggle army, led by 12 equally heroic knights. The entire force stood silently, like a wall of steel, exuding a stifling atmosphere. On the opposing side was a solitary figure, shrouded in a large black robe. From the carved figure, Atticus deduced that the person was a woman, her slender wrist holding a peculiar staff. Regarding the two opposing parties, Atticus, well-versed in history and lore, had some insights. Atticus Blaine remained silent, his mind filled with vague guesses as he moved to the third mural. The scene depicted a magnificent yet tragic war. The forest lay razed to the ground, with shocking cracks marring the earth. A vast lake, once as expansive as the ocean, had evaporated, and the large stone wall representing the sky bore deep fissures, as if the very fabric of space had been torn apart. The depiction on the third stone wall was clear, yet Atticus frowned. Could Muggle warriors and knights truly possess the power to contend with such a legendary wizard? He wondered. His doubts lingered until he glanced at Gryffindor, who was also studying the mural, a silver sword at his waist. This sight eased Atticus's uncertainty somewhat. The fourth mural illustrated the battle's aftermath. The witch appeared unchanged, still floating in the air, her gaze indifferent as she surveyed the corrupted land below, where blood flowed freely and the remains of Muggles lay scattered. On the ground, the 12 knights who had followed the warrior were gone. Only the warrior remained, standing alone with his sword, his tattered cloak fluttering behind him, a testament to his perseverance. Lost in the depiction of the battle, Atticus found himself standing at the center of the stone wall. The fifth mural showed the warrior's mount transforming into a Pegasus, which he rode with determination and fierceness toward the witch. The witch, wielding a strange staff, summoned a massive island that nearly filled the entire stone wall, its gaze directed toward a distant city-state. "The Isle of Avalon," Atticus murmured, squinting as he recognized the island's outline from his previous journey there with Gryffindor. The fifth mural contained another crucial detail. At its junction with the sixth mural, an old wizard with a flowing beard, reminiscent of Dumbledore, appeared, racing toward the battlefield. "Merlin," Atticus whispered, pursing his lips. In the depths of Nocturne Alley, a small square housed a pure white marble statue of Merlin, marking the entrance to London's underground world. Atticus was well acquainted with Merlin's image, having frequently passed through this entrance. The sixth mural captured the scene of Merlin and the warrior joining forces against the witch. The ground upheaved, and magma surged skyward from its depths. Atticus felt as though he were witnessing a war of gods lost to time. A detail in this mural caught his attention. The jellyfish at the top of the stone wall, previously motionless, now seemed to shake violently, with about 1/10 of its form having detached and vanished. The events in the seventh mural left Atticus astonished, sharpening Gryffindor's gaze as well. Together, Merlin and the warrior defeated the witch, who fell from the sky to the Isle of Avalon, which had returned to the ground. Before the old wizard, deceived to his death by the addition of unicorn tail hair, passed away, the phantom-like silhouette of the god of death emerged from the witch's body. In the penultimate mural, the jellyfish had completely disappeared from the top of the stone wall, as had the witch. Her peculiar staff was now held by Death in the final mural. This defeated god of death appeared to be in the act of throwing the staff, as if attempting to hurl it away. End of this chapter. Chapter 119, Follow Me. Atticus Blaine's emotions surged as he absorbed the astonishing god war depicted on the stone wall. The solitude of the scene left him feeling a touch of melancholy. In the final mural, the Reaper vanished, as did the valiant warrior, sword in hand, covered in wounds. Atticus surmised the warrior's fate. He too had perished in the battle. In the mural, only Merlin remained, standing before the temple where Atticus now found himself, his gaze fixed on the jellyfish that had gradually faded since the sixth mural. Among the figures portrayed, Atticus sensed the weight and desolation surrounding Merlin. After studying the 9 murals, Atticus stood silently before the towering stone wall for a long time. "The world is still whole. Is that what you meant, Mr. Gryffindor?" he mused aloud. After a moment, Atticus lifted his head, looking at Gryffindor, who was intently watching Merlin stand alone before the temple, and sighed. Atticus had come to understand that long ago, something significant had existed on Earth. The catastrophic chain reaction from that war had caused it to depart. Reflecting on the steady decline of the wizarding world since 2000, where wizards once revered as gods by Muggles had fallen, now vulnerable to even ordinary Muggles, Atticus believed that whatever had left was crucial to all wizards. The 9 murals depicted an epic battle, but left the aftermath of the war unexplained. What became of the witch or the death wizard? Was Merlin victorious, and if so, where did he go? Could this temple have been Merlin's final abode after relocating the Isle of Avalon to this hidden realm where he lived in solitude until he vanished into time? Atticus shook his head slightly, then turned to Gryffindor, whose expression was grave. "Something must have happened afterward, didn't it, Mr. Gryffindor?" Atticus speculated. His reasoning was straightforward. Gryffindor had not stumbled upon this secret place by chance. Thousands of years ago, the founding Big Four of Hogwarts must have known some dreadful secrets and were likely conspiring together. Upon entering the secret realm and unleashing his magic, the Phantom of Gryffindor, left behind in the chaotic timeline, had immediately appeared. It seemed he too was part of this plan. Meanwhile, the prophecy of Vedia's teacher, the ancestral priest of the Druids, had also drawn him in. Atticus frowned, feeling a strong sense of crisis from the conspiracy surrounding him. Who was the witch depicted in the mural? Considering Muggle myths, wizarding texts, and her ability to summon the Isle of Avalon, indicating her close ties with the Druids, Atticus settled on a name in his heart, Morgan Le Fay, the legendary Black Witch. According to ancient records, she was the queen of Avalon Island. As the adversary of Merlin, King Arthur, and the Knights of the Round Table, she was the goddess of darkness and death. Atticus vaguely recalled reading in a magical tome that Morgan Le Fay was believed to be possessed by an evil spirit. However, the murals before him suggested this might not be entirely unfounded. Gryffindor paid no heed to Atticus, who was lost in thought. After absorbing the mural's contents, Gryffindor turned, effortlessly cleaving the ruins, blocking the path with his silver sword, and proceeded toward a clear destination, the temple's front hall, where the woman Vedia awaited. Seeing this, Atticus had no choice but to suppress his doubts, take a deep breath, and follow swiftly. This strange journey into the secret realm was far from over. As the journey neared its end, Atticus Blaine took out several bottles of magic power recovery potion and drank them hastily. His body had a limited capacity to absorb and convert magic power, so consuming the potion so recklessly caused him considerable pain. Yet he gritted his teeth and forced himself to digest the potion, storing the magic power in his magic power organ. He was preparing for a candid encounter with Vitia Creona later. Atticus and his companion reached the wall fan behind the hall, where a small door led to the temple's vestibule. However, both Atticus and Gryffindor stopped almost simultaneously. "Chaotic time domain," Atticus muttered, staring at the hazy, spherical space that formed through the wall just a few steps away. His eyes were filled with fear. He suspected that Vitia Creona and the holy vessel, coveted by many modern druid priests, were in the temple hall behind the wall. He also realized why they had failed to retrieve it for centuries. Atticus glanced at a stone at his feet, tapped it with his wand, and watched as it floated into the air before accelerating into the hazy, distorted time domain like a large bubble. The 5-foot stone, upon entering the dangerous airspace, seemed to endure thousands of hours in an instant. It disintegrated into countless particles of dust, which remained suspended in midair. Within a single breath, the dust's color faded until it vanished completely. The corners of Atticus's eyes twitched uncontrollably, and he felt an overwhelming urge to curse. Was this some kind of joke? Had the druids erred in teaching their ancestors divination, or had Vitia misjudged his abilities? The power of time was untouchable. Why did they believe they could breach such a perilous field? While Godric Gryffindor might possess the ability, Atticus was not deluded. This was merely a phantom recorded by the chaotic time sequence enveloping the island of Avalon. Even if Gryffindor could break through the time blockade, it had been repaired over 1,000 years. Atticus had no intention of foolishly charging in and being obliterated. Convinced he couldn't penetrate the time domain, Atticus didn't hesitate long before deciding to leave. The main entrance of the hall should be accessible. Otherwise, Vitia wouldn't have been able to enter the temple. He planned to approach the front hall from another direction, confront Vitia, and then extract information from her. As for Gryffindor's next move, Atticus had already anticipated it. Perhaps Gryffindor, like himself, couldn't breach the domain, or maybe he was truly unafraid of the power of time and would enter it. But the outcome was certain. Nothing would be gained. Otherwise, why would the druids have failed for centuries? Don't be afraid. Follow me. Just as Atticus turned to leave, a slightly dignified voice from behind made his pupils tremble, and his entire body stiffened. End of this chapter. Chapter 120, The Gryffindor Holy Sword and the Two-Headed Serpent Staff. Atticus Blaine suddenly turned his head, his eyes wide with disbelief, as he stared at Godric Gryffindor, who stood with a raised silver sword, facing the time domain. Every cell in Atticus's body trembled with shock. Was it possible he had just experienced an auditory hallucination? With eyes filled with terror, Atticus surveyed the dimly lit temple, inch by inch. Despite several thorough inspections, he found no clues. The dilapidated room held only him and Gryffindor. No other wizards lurked in the shadows. "Did you just speak to me, Mr. Gryffindor?" Atticus's voice was shaky, his fear evident. Yet Gryffindor, who had shattered Atticus's understanding of the world, remained unchanged, ignoring Atticus's repeated calls. He gripped the hilt of the silver sword with both hands, holding it aloft, seemingly observing the time domain before him. "What is happening?" Atticus murmured, his breath shallow and his mind clouded with confusion. Who was Gryffindor with thousands of years ago? Was he speaking to someone who accompanied him? But that person's power couldn't possibly match Gryffindor's, nor could it interfere with time. No, Gryffindor never conversed with anyone. It can't be that. Atticus's knowledge failed to provide a reasonable explanation. He stared at Gryffindor's back, feeling lost and bewildered. Suddenly, the silver sword in Gryffindor's hands burst into a brilliant light. The straight, sharp blade was enveloped in a transparent, water-like magic, a strange power that Atticus couldn't comprehend, yet it filled him with a familiar sense of dread. For Gryffindor, dealing with the intense turbulence of time was no simple task. It was akin to cutting flesh with a blunt knife, or sawing wood with rusty teeth. The effort was immense, and even Atticus found himself holding his breath in anticipation. Despite the difficulty, Gryffindor managed to carve a few feet of clearance in the distorted, hazy space. He stepped into the edge of the area once covered by the time domain and raised his sword to strike again. In Atticus's vision, as soon as Gryffindor entered the time domain, he vanished, leaving Atticus alone in the space. Did Gryffindor appear in the modern magical world, or have I been unknowingly transported back thousands of years? Atticus wondered, though both scenarios seemed impossible. It was a wild guess, born of his astonishment. Should he follow? As a qualified Slytherin, Atticus knew he should avoid situations beyond his understanding and fraught with danger. Yet, if he always prioritized safety, he might as well remain at Hogwarts, teaching under Dumbledore's watchful eye. The hesitation in Atticus's eyes faded, replaced by determination. He gritted his teeth, stood where Gryffindor had been, took a deep breath, and stepped into the time domain. It felt like being hurled onto a high-speed train from a standstill. The sudden dizziness nearly caused him to stumble into the chaotic, dangerous areas on either side. Gryffindor reappeared in his field of vision, not as a solitary figure, but as a series of dislocated images, much like Atticus had seen when he first approached the temple. Atticus turned his gaze to the narrow, clear space around him, surrounded by the chaos of time. The sequence felt like an abyss. After contemplating for a moment, Atticus Blaine lifted the corner of his cloak and reached inside, much like he had done with the stone. The feedback he received sent a chill down his spine. As he traversed the barrier, the outside world vanished from view, and each passing second stretched into what felt like an entire year. Atticus dared not be careless, for a single misstep could reduce him to dust and nothingness. After an indeterminate amount of time, Gryffindor vanished from sight once more. Surprisingly, Atticus felt a sense of calm rather than anxiety. He deduced that Gryffindor had successfully breached the barrier of time and entered the inner space. Another wave of dizziness, akin to the world's spin, gnawing, overcame him. When the world finally stabilized, Atticus, suppressing the lingering dizziness, realized he had passed through the small door concealed by the time domain. He now stood in the temple's grand yet austere hall. Vicia stood at the temple's entrance, her gaze fixed anxiously on the mist-shrouded swamp. Atticus surmised that the commotion from his earlier battle had drawn her attention. However, trapped in the chaotic space, she dared not venture out. Within the time barrier, Atticus's magic and presence were perfectly concealed. Vicia remained unaware that the Atticus she awaited had already entered the temple and was now just a step away from the holy artifact that druids had coveted for centuries. At the center of a round altar made of gray rock stood a strangely shaped scepter. It was upright, and from its base embedded in the altar, an endless stream of death and decay flowed into the earth. This was the very force that had transformed the once vibrant holy land of Druidism, Avalon, into a doomsday landscape of absolute desolation. Though Atticus had never seen it before, the moment his eyes fell upon it, he knew its name, the Staff of Two Snakes, the Staff of Hermes from Greek mythology, and it was only a few steps away. His heart pounded like a drum, and he swallowed hard. If there were truly artifacts in the wizarding world of Harry Potter, the two snakes would undoubtedly be among them. His gaze was drawn to the two entwined golden scepters, the fierce black serpents. He momentarily forgot to ponder how this artifact had come into Morgan Le Fay's possession, or how it could be a holy weapon of the Druid sect. "Oh, an interesting staff," Gryffindor, in stark contrast to Atticus's awe, appeared much calmer. With a smile, he approached the altar, circling the staff of two snakes. "I think Salazar will like you very much," he remarked. With that, Gryffindor reached out for the snake wand, intending to retrieve the scepter for his best friend. At Gryffindor's words, Atticus's body trembled. He stared wide-eyed at the two black serpents. The more he looked, the more familiar they seemed, and the more terrified he became. Finally, he was almost certain of his discovery. The creatures entwined with the golden staff were not pythons at all, but two shrunken basilisks. Atticus had encountered a very real basilisk just months ago in the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets. The thought of the Chamber of Secrets made him grip his wand tightly, his dry lips twitching. Could it be that Slytherin established the Chamber of Secrets not to target young Muggle-born wizards, but to breed basilisks and study the double snake staff? He wondered aloud. End of this chapter.